Man, what day even is it? August? Oh my goodness! I missed the 2-year anniversary by a long shot. Oh, you know what? Even if it's a little bit late, the bathrobe's staying in the closet for today. For such a special occasion, I've got to at least try to not look like a moron. I still look like an idiot. I have been playing Maplestory for a very long time now, and a classic that game is. Not just for me either, is a childhood staple of many born all the way up and through the 2000s. There's only one problem. I don't enjoy playing the game anymore. But, just like all the people who buy every single Pokemon game, I very clearly hold some degree of Stockholm Syndrome with regards to this entity, because year after year, I'd come back, play for a month or so, and go, wow, this game sucks, and quit. But I'd come back. I'd always come back. However, personally, I never really cared about the guilds, or the socializing, or the bossing, or the grinding, no. I was always in it for the story. In other words, there's a way for me to break free from my shackles. For what always kept me coming back to the game was the story I'd been watching unfold for years. The story of the Black Mage, a godlike enemy being sealed away by the world's greatest heroes, only for his looming return to threaten the peace they'd created. A storyline which finally came to its conclusion with his addition to the game. All I had to do was get there. And so, on the 10th of June, 2020, I set out on my quest, with this video serving to bring you along on my journey to free myself from myself. Now, where else is there to begin but the beginning, with character creation? There are a lot of characters to choose from in Maplestory, but unfortunately for everyone else, there's only one best one, and that's Demon Slayer. Multiple invincibility skills, they can fly, a lock-on teleport. Mechanically, they're the equivalent of a Yu-Gi-Oh deck with like a couple dozen copies of Mystical Space Typhoon, Change of Heart, Pot of Greed, and Monster Reborn, okay? They just got every tool at their disposal. Plus, and this is the important bit, mind you, I think they look pretty cool. And as a former commander of the Black Mage, they get exclusive dialogue with a whole bunch of characters. Quite frankly, the only other option was Demon Avenger. Now, I'd been told there would be 3 major progression hurdles I'd have to overcome on my journey. The Chaos Root Abyss bosses, Damien and Lotus, and Wucid and Will. The spoils of which would be massive upgrades to my character's gear. So, from day one, I, and all my friends who'd joined me on my crusade, had our sights firmly set on preparing for this first hurdle. Doing so would entail 2 things: defeating weaker bosses to get some gear we could upgrade for the time being, and power leveling to unlock all our abilities and to receive the benefits of the current event. See, I'd actually been planning this quest for several months at this point, but I specifically waited for June 10th because it marked the beginning of an event where I could create a Terra-burning character, which meant every time I leveled up once, I'd actually level up 3 times instead, all the way to level 199. Additionally, at level 100, 150, and 200, I get these boxes full of equipment which would help greatly strengthen my character, including, funnily enough, a 90-day temporary set of craw gear. But even with all that, it didn't even come close to filling out all my equipment slots. That's where the early bosses would be coming in. However, before we move on, it took me until like May 2022, that's like last month, to figure out that by setting my canvas resolution on OBS to 4K, but then the output resolution to 1080p, I was making the game go from looking like this to looking like this, which really came as a surprise to me, considering Maplestory's resolution caps out at 1080p anyways. But hey, as they say, you live, you learn. And looking back on it, it does kinda make perfect sense. Additionally, it took over a year before I dug through the settings and found out about things like multiple audio tracks, noise gating, and CQP mode, prior to which I just shoved everything into a single audio track with no noise filtering. Luci's about to unleash her power! And used VBR at a low enough bitrate that clips would oftentimes come out looking like this.
I'm so glad that aluminum didn't work.
As such, I have gone to re-record a lot of stuff, so if there are, at times, seemingly random jumps in video quality accompanied by my character completely changing appearance, that's why. Now, back to Maplestory's early bosses. The nicest way I can put this is they could use some improvements. The full list of bosses I farmed pre-cra, in no particular order, goes as follows. Von Leon, Pink Bean, Arcarium, Cygnus, Magnus, Hilla, Horntail, and Zachem. For starters, I need to explain two recurring mechanics for these early bosses, Damage Ignore and Damage Reflect. These are buffs certain bosses will periodically cast upon themselves, both of which doing pretty much exactly what their name implies. Damage Ignore reduces all incoming damage to 1, and Damage Reflect reflects your damage back onto you. In the case of Damage Reflect, the ratio between player health and damage at this stage of the game goes as such. You're doing like a couple million per hit, while your HP is reaching into the mid 5 digits, tops. Or in other words, if you hit a boss while they have Damage Reflect up, you die instantly. Functionally, this means, in both cases, that you're just going to be sitting there not really doing much for a good 15 to 20 seconds, which is extremely fun, I can assure you. Now, I won't bore you with all the little details of every single boss. Instead, I'll go over some of the relative highs and the absolute lows. So, let's begin with the okay stuff. Cygnus and Zachem. Cygnus has a Damage Reflect, and Zachem has a Damage Ignore, plus a few more annoying abilities on both ends. But their main attacks are actually pretty alright. Cygnus owns these big purple pillars that cover massive swaths of the map, with you having to either get out of the way or be atomized, with a similar case for Zachem's hands. You get a good amount of time to dodge, but not so much that it feels trivial. Not too shabby, really. That brings the good bits to an end! Okay, now, to be fair, most of these bosses really aren't that bad. They generally range from meh to manageably annoying, but yeah, I don't know if I just never looked at these bosses in a critical light before, or if the things I look for in a boss fight have just completely changed since I last played Maple, but with a few of these early bosses, when I made a serious effort to learn their mechanics, it just completely killed the nostalgia I felt towards them with how unenjoyable they were. For example, Pink Bean. It's split into two phases. The first against all these statues, and the second against the unspecified transcendent from Bean World. Anyways, pretty much every single one of these statues has some sort of annoying ability that you have to deal with. From left to right, Book Guy can silence or stun you, the bird next to him has a Damage Reflect, the angel statue has a Damage Ignore, and the other Book Guy can make all of your attacks miss and reverse your controls. Additionally, and I don't know which statue does this, but you'll occasionally be hit with this sort of alternative version of stun where it says, you have been seduced, which, you know, since I'm like 12, I found that to be mildly amusing, but it's worth noting that I say hit in quotation marks, because you're not actually hit with anything. They just cast the ability and you have been seduced. Oh, and by the way, the same applies to literally every single debuff I just mentioned. Blind, silence, stun, confuse, they cast the animation and you just have it now. While you can get rid of most of the debuffs with an all-cure potion, the problem is these guys are spamming, and I mean spamming them onto you. I'm talking clear it with a potion and it'll be replaced in the next 2 seconds like it's some sort of Lernian Hydra, where you cure one debuff only for a more annoying one to take its place. Of course, that's only the first phase. After you've finished dealing with one of Heracles' 12 labors, the 13th finally steps down into the ring, and it's still not good. Oh, he's got a Damage Reflect. Yeah, it's my favorite. Next up, Magnus, who just might be the worst boss I have fought in any game. Like, Jesus, Magnus is so bad. For starters, you deal 10% damage, heal 10% the nominal value of potions, and lose 10% max HP per second while you're not in this zone. Okay, sure, fine. You die if you're not in the zone, and the zone gets smaller. Great. But here's what unequivocally ruins the fight for me. The meteors. See, Nexon loves meteor boss design, and Magnus is by far the worst implementation of it. Throughout the fight, these meteors will come raining down randomly across the map, with the green meteors, the weakest ones, already dealing 50% damage, and the blue and purple ones just killing you outright. The zone will shrink when Magnus's health hits 75, 50, and 25% health, with these changes accompanied by an increased volume of meteors. While it's manageable in the early stages, once he hits 25% health, the sheer volume of death flooding down from above just becomes absolutely unbearable. In the case of me and my friends, we regularly found ourselves in situations where I was like, wait, I'm literally option selected in every direction, and I have no choice but to accept the cold hand of death. Or, wait, I'm going to die to the DOT before I can even reach the boss because of how long it takes to traverse this gigantic arena with all these meteors in the way. Seriously, the rest of Magnus's attacks are completely fine. Well, other than the chemical warfare attack. But other than that, I genuinely think Magnus would be a really good boss if you just took out the meteors, because there's just too many of them. Like, when you've overlaid that many death boxes onto everything else he does, it's often just not possible to survive by any means unless you have an invincibility skill off cooldown, which isn't something most classes can rely on often enough to be able to deal with this. In any case, I trudged through it, acquiring the Condensed Power Crystal and Aquatic Letter Eye accessory from Zachem, Deus Ex Earring, Chaos Horntail Necklace, and Silver Blossom Ring from Horntail, a Noble Ephia's Ring from Von Leon, a Mechanator Pendant from Arcarium, a Golden Clover Belt and Pink Holy Cup from Pink Bean, a Royal Black Metal Shoulder, and a Crystal Ventus Badge from Magnus, and several pieces of the Lionheart set from Cygnus to fill out all my equipment slots. But wait. It's time for an interlude. It's time for an interlude. It's time to talk about some core character progression mechanics. First up, potentials. Now that we'd acquired some gear, the next step would be to upgrade it until we were strong enough to clear Craw, and the main system through which we'd be doing this was potentials. Basically, you staple more stats onto an item. There are 4 potential ranks, and an item can have up to 3 lines of potential. You use cubes to reroll the potential of an item, and depending on the cube, you'll also be rolling for a rank up at the same time. So, we'd be spending all our hard-earned misos to buy these cubes, and then spamming them on our equips. Now, I'm generally not a fan of all RNG mechanics with no eventual guaranteed upgrades, but the amount of investment required to get lines that are good enough is admittedly very reasonable at this stage of the game, so whatever. Although you will, at some point, have to deal with an equip eating over 100 black cubes without hitting legendary, even though it's supposed to be like a 5% rank up chance, but hey, what can you do? Anyways, having acquired and now given some upgrades to our gear, it was time for me and my friends to take on the Chaos Root Abyss. Craw has 2 sort of unofficial sections. The 3 doors, corresponding to the bosses that give you the helmet, chestplate, and leggings, and Vellum, who gives you the weapon, and is notably more difficult than the others. Of the 3 doors bosses, Crimson Queen and Von Bon are pretty mediocre. I don't really have very much to say about them other than Von Bon feels like you're fighting the game's engine more so than the boss. Pierre though? Pierre is absolutely horrendous. Okay, not really. Pierre's mostly fine. It's just 2 mechanics that make this boss absolutely dreadful. Pierre's main gimmick is, every 30 seconds, he will switch to one of his 3 forms, mainly the red and blue forms, both of which have different signature attacks, and who cares? Like, he literally teleports behind you? Whatever. That's not the problem. The problem is that players also receive hats, and if you attack Pierre of the same color, you will heal him. The colors of the hats are completely random on both ends, meaning you're gonna very consistently have to deal with what's effectively a 30-second damage ignore. As such, every time he switches from his base form, it's as if you're coin flipping over whether or not you actually get to fight the boss. The only saving grace of this mechanic is you deal double damage to Pierre if he has the opposite color hat from you, as it makes it possible to cheese your way through the next mechanic, splitting. Once he goes below 30% HP, Pierre will split in two, one red, one blue. If that was it, it wouldn't be that bad. It would just be insufferable, trying to lure them apart such that you can hit one of them and not the other, cause, you know, 2D game. But what makes it go from insufferable tier to please God just let the pain end tier is that if you kill one of the Pierres, but don't manage to kill the other before the next hat cycle switch, the Pierre you just killed respawns. This is quite possibly the worst singular boss mechanic I have seen in any game. And in the case of me and my friends, what we ended up doing was get him as close to 30% as possible, then stop attacking. Then we waited, and waited, and waited, until the majority of the party had the opposing hat, at which point we threw everything we had at Pierre, trying to burst him down before he could split. If we ever did fail the DPS check and Pierre did split, we literally just walked out of the fight every single time. Because trying to coordinate a simultaneous takedown on both Pierres, all the while juggling the threat of him teleporting or even just walking in front of himself, all within a 30-second time window, like, that is not happening, okay? It's not happening, and it's not even worth the effort to try. Just walk out and run it again. Vellum, though? He was different. Chaos Vellum was the first good boss experience I had in my run. One of the primary threats you're gonna have to deal with in this fight is the tails. You will be constantly targeted by these tail attacks, which, after a few seconds, will pop out of the ground, killing you if they hit. Now, yes, it doesn't make any sense that Vellum has multiple tails, considering he very clearly only has one, but it's okay, because it has allowed for some very good boss design. It encourages constant movement to prevent, well, dying, but at the same time, a common counter strategy is actually to stand still for a short period of time while you're being targeted, stacking as many tails on the same spot as possible before dashing out at the last moment. The risk associated with this is, of course, if you mistime it, you die, but pulling it off allows you to get much more damage done and reduces the danger zone as much as possible. Now, there being multiple approaches to dodging this, with the riskier options having some benefits attached, is nice, but what makes it good is the synergy it has with Vellum's other attacks. Vellum will be constantly burrowing into and bursting from the ground, and occasionally he will go into this attack, shooting 3 massive fireballs in front of himself. It's not too difficult to dodge if you stick close to him, with my initial reaction being, oh, if I can just get behind him, I can wail away at his exposed backside with impunity. But you can't. That's wrong, man. It's wrong because of the tails. The tails mean, while you can get some damage in while he's fireballing, you can't let your guard down or else you'll get tailed. You can do the traditional wait till the last second before dodging out of the way, but there's 2 problems. 1. When he burrows back into the ground, he has an additional hitbox which sends you flying, very often straight into a tail. So, you have to remember to back off after the last fireball or you'll fairly regularly die. As such, if you don't want to lose out on damage, you have to space yourself properly, moving from one side to the other such that you can be ripping into Vellum the entire time before dashing out right at the end. However, problem 2. Periodic falling rocks that stun if they hit you mean you can't just play off an algorithm. You have to watch for them if you don't want to get stunned into a tail, and they'll very regularly mess with your planned spacing, such that you might have to adapt by taking a riskier dodge path, or by backing off and sacrificing the potential damage. The constant but always slightly different overlapping timings for the fireballs, tails, falling rocks, and burrowing mean you'll constantly have to analyze the battlefield, come up with the optimal plan of action, and put it into action immediately. It requires planning several steps ahead with your spacing so that you don't corner yourself into a tail or fireball, while also reacting to the small changes such that you're not stunned by falling rocks, plus the non-insignificant mechanical finesse to pull all this off in real time. Doing this optimally, such that you're able to swing constantly like a madman while still dodging everything, feels so satisfying. Most of the good things I just mentioned about the fireball attack also apply to his next attack, this acid rain thing, where he will unburrow and begin shooting splashes of acid all over the floor, dealing some initial damage when it lands, plus a DOT if you stand in it. There is a bit of a problem with this one though, in that if you have a pet with auto heal, the acid itself just is not a threat, as both the impact damage and the DOT would just be instantly healed off without you having to lift a finger. But still, weaving in between all the tails and falling rocks while trying to DPS optimally is pretty fun. He also has this attack, where he'll appear on one of the edges of the map, and after a long charge up, burn everything beyond this little safe zone below him to ashes and dust. Since the side he appears on is random, you need to play towards one of the edges of the map to be able to guarantee dodging the attack, as you don't have enough time to check both sides if you start in the middle, but you'll just barely make it if you run from one side to the other. And I mean, yeah, it looks pretty cool. Alternatively, if you don't want to go through all that effort, you can just play Demon Slayer, and use Chaos Lock, a lock-on teleportability from anywhere on the map, mind you, and you will suddenly find yourself within his immediate vicinity. Best character in the game. Now, those aren't all his attacks, but, 3-hour video. So I'm just gonna move on. Overall, good boss. So yeah, we got our real cross set, and it was on to the next hurdle. Getting Absolab gear. This would involve beating Damien and Lotus, but to unlock these two bosses, I'd have to do the Maple Alliance blockbusters, massive, multi-act story campaigns showcasing some of Maple World's most grand events. The first of these to occur is Black Heaven, in which the Alliance hears of the Black Wings, an organization which has long occupied the town of Edelstein, supposedly building a little airship. It's all like, whoa, the Maple Alliance is going to war! It's this grand tale of drama and action and redemption and revenge, and I'm not interested in summarizing like a 7-hour story campaign. It's all like bing bing bang bang, Orchid's best girl, cool shot where she blows up Gelmer's bombs, whatever. It really is not that well written, to be honest. Now, if you're wondering what I'm talking about, well, as a little taste, during the calm before the storm as you approach the Black Wings' fleet, you hear of a potential shapeshifter having infiltrated the Alliance's airship, and after some investigation you snuff them out, but it turns out they've got Nineheart, the chief tactician, on his last legs. Oh no! But before you can apprehend them, they transform into Empress Cygnus, and it's all like, you couldn't hit the Empress, could you? Except it's literally not the Empress, so you click hit her 3 times in a row before this guy comes in and bashes your head in with a wrench. When you wake up, Nineheart goes on about how, I don't blame you for not hitting her, nobody could have done it. Like, it can't just be a me thing where I don't feel that way at all, and I would have immediately cracked her skull open, right? Like, it's literally not her, man. The dude transforms right in front of you. I get that it's a thing where maybe it would cause you to hesitate for a moment, but the moment that moment's over and the logic switch in your brain flicks back on, you... Anyways, that's mildly annoying, but actually isn't the main point. The thing that doesn't make any sense is after you're knocked out, they just leave the two of you tied to a barrel in that same room. What? You have the Alliance's chief tactician and one of their most prominent fighters unconscious, and you don't kill them. You don't capture them. You don't by some means completely incapacitate them. Instead, you just leave them tied to a barrel in the enemy's airship? Why? But, despite its flaws, and despite this being like the 6th time I've done this, I still enjoyed myself because it's like 7 hours of story content largely revolving around Orchid. I live for this stuff. Oh, and also, my game bugged out at the Lotus Phase 3 transition scene, and cutscenes started looking like this until I was able to relog, so yeah, that's pretty cool. Next up was Heroes of Maple, and while I still found it very interesting, I'm still not interested in summarizing a multi-hour story campaign. All you're gonna get is that the demon's brother, Damien, is basically threatening to start a major land war with the Alliance using his massive demon army, and it ends with his death at my hands. RIP. You play as a bunch of different characters instead of your character, which I thought was pretty cool, but you have to deal with fixed key bindings for the whole thing, which I thought was pretty annoying. Also, they gave Mercedes this bomb-ass gorgeous sprite and character art, but then when you go to make a Mercedes, the sprite looks like this. In any case, with those two campaigns done, we had now unlocked the pair of bosses known as dotus, from whom we could acquire our Absolab gear. And yes, it's called dotus. Of the two, Lotus is slightly easier, so me and my friends focused on clearing Lotus first. He has 3 phases, and if you ignore phase 1, Lotus is Maplestory's best boss. Or so I'd like to say. But admittedly, my class is extremely privileged against him, so I'm just going to settle on calling him my favorite. Notably, in that statement I have to ignore phase 1 because it is boring and terrible, and I mentally put it in the same category as having to do an annoying trek to fight a boss rather than being part of the boss itself. The only thing I'm gonna say is that I'm really glad Demon Slayer basically doesn't have to interact with this phase because I can just use Chaos Lock. Best character in the game. Moving on to what I actually consider the boss, there has been a massive design improvement compared to the previous set of landmark bosses, Cra, in that there is now a 5-second potion cooldown. While this has appeared in a few other bosses prior, from dotus onwards it becomes the standard. What's great about this is bosses can now have most of their attacks not kill you instantly while still being a threat, as previously any attack that didn't do so was healed off immediately. But now, there's at least a small amount of damage permanence, and as such, bosses can have much greater variation not just in their damage percentages, but in their overall design. Now, one of the key components of this fight are the meteors, but unlike pretty much every other iteration of meteors in this game, lotuses are actually good! For starters, in phase 2, none of them can one-hit you. In fact, none of them even clear 50% max HP damage. Furthermore, the amount of meteors on your screen is pretty much always manageable. You'll rarely ever find yourself in a Magnus situation where you have no choice but to iframe or die. Lastly, they all fall at a fixed, very reasonable speed, contrary to Magnus and Von Bon, where the speed is randomized, and you'll regularly have one-shotting meteors rocketing towards the floor like they're about to initiate the second impact. Because of all that, they're actually a very welcome addition to the fight. They're constantly coming in during Lotus's attack patterns, and it adds an additional layer to the combat, where you have to pay attention both to what Lotus is doing, and to if you're about to get a steel beam dropped on your head. Lotus's main attack is a sort of wire punch, dealing 20% of your max HP if it hits you, with enough windup that you can always dodge it if you're ready for it, but if you're in the middle of an attack animation, it'll almost certainly hit you. But there's a certain range of Lotus from within which you'll use this attack, so if you can skirt around the maximum distance matching Lotus's movements, you can easily bait it out and dodge it every time while getting some good damage in. Very good, but what makes it great is the synergy it has with his other attacks. The punch has super knockback, meaning you're gonna get thrashed around by it no matter what. While the attack doesn't do very significant damage on its own, meaning you can just eat it every once in a while and be fine, you need to be very careful with your positioning, because if there are any meteors falling behind you, Lotus will combo you straight into them for a potentially massive amount of damage. The combo power is further enhanced by this next attack, the platform electric floor thing. The floor is lava? Yeah, I don't really know what to call it, so I'm just going to explain how it works. Every once in a while, a set of these red platforms will appear in the typical forecast of gigantic robots and massive hunks of metal, acting as a precursor to this electrified floor attack. They will fall to the ground, upon which you can stand, to avoid dying to this lightning thing, which deals 70% max HP per second. Very dangerous. However, if a player is hit by one of the platforms as it's falling, not only will they take damage, the platform disappears, removing one of your potential safe zones from the electricity. As you might expect, this very much ties into the wire punch, as it can very much mash you into the platforms as they're falling, and Lotus can very much punch you straight off the platforms after they've landed. The only real problem with this attack is the number of platforms which spawn is random, ranging all the way from like 6 or 7, down to 1. This is admittedly pretty dumb, since trying to dodge anything from Lotus's punches to other meteors is practically impossible if you only have one spot upon which you can stand. But, other than that, what makes this attack really cool and interesting is how it forces you to immediately adapt and reposition to the arena effectively changing, and then continuing to dodge the meteors plus Lotus's other attacks in this temporarily reduced play area. Of course, you could alternatively just play the demon and do this. It's the best character, I tell you. The best character ever! Additionally, the music for Lotus is great. The intense choir and the drums fit so well with how grand the stage you're fighting on is, and how there's so much going on, stuff flying all over the screen, and... You know what, I'm not a musician, okay? I don't know music theory, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just gonna let the music speak for itself. Then, when you transition to phase 3, it's like, wow, you can see all the way outside? And then the music goes all like... Speaking of phase 3, there are a few changes. Mainly a slight damage increase on most of its attacks, plus a few new ones. For one, there's an additional meteor, the Death Tractor, which, as you might expect, kills you in one hit. Now, this is the point where I would start complaining because, oh, it's a one-hit meteor with a gigantic hitbox, but I'm actually not, because this was very well implemented. For starters, they, again, fall at a fixed, very reasonable speed, giving you more than enough time to get out of the way. Furthermore, they aren't just cycled in with the rest of the meteors constantly, they appear much more rarely. As such, I don't mind it, in fact, I think it's quite good. And, of course, the punch into Death Tractor combo is literally lethal, so better stay on your toes. Finally, there's this attack, where Lotus goes unhittable, teleports into the sky, and starts barraging you with these one-hit purple balls. It's actually really cool, and it very much hits the sweet spot of giving you enough time to dodge, but not so much that it feels easy, especially since Lotus being unhittable means you're not going to be stuck in an attack animation. And you still have to pay attention to the meteors too, because if they clip you while you're getting out of the way, you'll find that you're getting sent to the afterlife instead. The only real issue is when Lotus does the attack, your screen gets super dark. I don't really know why this happens, it might be a thing to combat epilepsy, but there are several things in this game that are several orders of magnitude worse in that regard, which aren't darkened at all, so... I don't know. Overall though, the way these attacks, which on their own are rather simple, but when put together form this incredibly complex and dynamic moveset that never really feels that unfair on the part of the player, and how it encourages you to constantly analyze the battlefield, formulate a plan of action, and immediately put it into action, I believe to be marks of genuinely really strong boss design. Combined with the generally good visuals and music, Lotus is, without a doubt, my favorite boss in the game. And again, that is very possibly because my character is just super privileged against him. But hey, maybe you should have just played the best character in the game too then. How about that? However, as a sort of twist of fate, while Lotus was great, Damien was the opposite of that. He was not great, not at all. Yeah, so Damien's actually a real interesting topic to tackle, because all the way up until October 2021, this boss basically, did not work. And honestly, I think I preferred it before. Not only could I complain far more vitriolically if it was still broken, but me and my friends loved to just point and laugh at how the boss managed to exist in the state it did for several years. But now it's like a functional boss. It's like, come on. Like, all you've done is you've just stripped away all the bits that I got to point and laugh at. And now it's just kind of boring. One of Damien's core mechanics is his brands, which is yet another god-awful gimmick mechanic to staple onto the legacy of this game. Every 28 seconds, Damien applies a brand to a player. You cleanse the brands using this statue thing, which will randomly appear throughout the fight, disappearing after it's used or after a couple seconds. My biggest problem with this is how inconsistent cleansing the brands is. The statue sticks around for like 10 seconds tops, and it takes like 3 seconds to use it, which really is not a generous time window. It can and will disappear while you're using it, which will cancel your cleanse, and your cleanse will also be cancelled if you're hit by an attack. While all these things may sound reasonable on paper, by the nature of Damien's other attacks, they very much are not. The application of brands is undodgeable by any means, and so is the result of hitting max brands, that being instant death. In addition to dying instantly, a second sword will be added to the battlefield. To elaborate on what that means, during Phase 1, Damien's sword will be flying around like an annoying little insect, dealing 20% max health damage with each hit. It moves really fast in relatively random directions, such that actually attempting to dodge it is pretty much not worth your time because of how often you'll have to stop attacking to do so. Occasionally, a player will be targeted by the sword and will dash towards their current position. Upon reaching them, the sword will stick into the ground and periodically explode, dealing 90% max HP damage, after which it will go back to just being generally annoying. Back to the brands, a copy of this flying sword will be summoned if you hit 7 brands, and will go through the cycle of being an annoying pest before sticking in the ground 3 times before disappearing. Yeah, 1 already wasn't fun, and 2 even more so. Oh, and additionally, getting hit by this sword, flying randomly and unpredictably all over the screen, will cancel your cleanse. And if it gets cancelled once, it's exceedingly likely that the altar's gonna run out of time before you can use it again. Did you know that? Did you know that? Of course, you could wait for the sword to stick itself into the ground before using the altar, but for one, doing so eats into your already very limited time window. But furthermore, there is no method through which you can determine when the sword's actually going to dive for you, nor is there any method of baiting it into doing so. Additionally, when the sword actually does dive for someone, it will very often just not stick in the ground several times in a row, instead dragging out the attack for so long that the altar will very often no longer have enough time to be used. If you just say, screw it, and go for the altar regardless, that will very regularly result in the sword embedding itself upon the altar, which is actually really good for the stock market. Ultimately, what this means is your ability to cleanse brands almost entirely comes down to luck, in whether or not the altar appears while the sword is already in the ground, or whether the sword is cooperative after the altar has appeared. And personally, I did not find this to be fun or enjoyable in any capacity. Next up is this sort of gas bomb attack, where Damien creates these dark gas clouds which, after a delay, one-hit everything below them. The telegraph is exceedingly long, and it makes dodging it feel pretty trivial. He also has this claw attack, where he, again, winds up for a ridiculously long amount of time before dashing forward. The damage versus the amount of time he spends winding up is just completely off. You get like a full 2 seconds to dodge for an attack that only does 30% of your max HP. In a similar vein, Damien will occasionally go into this dive bomb attack, which has, again, a ridiculously long wind-up in relation to the amount of damage it deals. And yes, I am aware that both of these attacks apply a brand stack if they hit you, but I think I've already sufficiently explained why I think the brands as a whole are terrible. Additionally, throughout the fight, these blue and black orb things will appear overhead, sitting there for a few seconds before grasping downwards. If you get hit, you will be immobilized and are given a string of keys to input. Getting them all correct releases you, failing keeps you immobilized for 8 seconds. This is just plain annoying. Like, I don't know about you, but personally, I've found being crowd controlled to not be a fun mechanic in any game, and this attack literally binds you. Even though inputting the correct keys isn't too difficult, it's still extremely annoying to deal with, and just like, having to do a segment out of the Hunter Bros Chicken Dance minigame in the middle of a boss fight just feels so unbelievably shoehorned in and out of place. Like, just do 40% of my max HP or something, man. Don't bother with all this tacked-on nonsense. Finally, there's this one, where he teleports up into the air and starts raining these balls down everywhere, but not in an interesting way, such as an all-dodging phase, where they blanket the entire arena and you have to dodge and weave between them. No. Of course it's not like that. Instead, they rain down in a density such that dodging them if you're within the danger zone is practically impossible, and it's done over such a small section of the arena, with the balls falling down so slowly, that getting out of the way in time is completely trivial. And once you've gotten out of the way, there really isn't very much you can do other than just sit around and wait for him to finish the attack, because his hitbox is all the way up here, and the majority of classes will not be able to reach him that consistently with their abilities. This attack, sucks. As for Phase 2, the flying sword disappears, which is good, but the brands are applied every 18 seconds now instead of 28, while the alter timings are exactly the same, which is bad. The claw dash has been replaced with a much quicker sword dash, which is almost a good attack, except for the fact that the range is like half the map, meaning that you're not going to be able to space it out like Lotus's punch, and you're just going to have to eat it plus the brand stack if it catches you while you're in an attack animation, without you being able to do very much of anything about it. Being able to dodge it by ducking is cool, but again, it's reasonably impossible to dodge if you're not willing to sit there dealing reduced DPS, or possibly just not attacking while waiting for him to use the move, which he might just not. The dive bomb has been upgraded to a one-hit, and he will occasionally switch the direction he dives towards, and who cares, he just sits up there for an eternity like it's Magnus anyways. Another new addition. At certain health checkpoints, these giant blue balls will appear and or grow in size, and just like the immortal snail, slow though they may be, they will eternally pursue your exact location. This is like a Magnus tier attack. In fact, if you think about it, it's actually just the Magnus DOT zone if they made it even more annoying. For starters, the blue balls deal some damage while they're on top of you. Fine. Completely fine. A boring, lazy, uninteresting, annoying attack, but fine. But then, when one of the blue balls are on top of you, all sources of healing are reduced by 90%. And keep in mind, these are some big blue balls, and the effect even lingers for a moment even after you leave their radius. This is just plain annoying. But then, when one of the blue balls are on top of you, all of your damage is reduced by 90%! I don't even need to explain why this is awful, right? Blue balls, this gargantuan, which permanently track your location, deal DOT, and reduce healing and damage by 90%? It's just what's fun about this? What this often devolved into for me and my friends was one person would literally focus on pulling aggro for the balls, just sitting out of the fight saying, yeah, I'll take care of them. And they just sit there not doing anything, so everyone else could actually fight the boss. Overall, absolutely dreadful! Finally, an attack where Damien dashes forward, performing 3 equidistant slashes, which after a few seconds, explode, dealing 1-hit damage. This one is actually good. For a one-hit attack, you get enough time to get out of the way, but not so much that it's easy, blah blah blah. I've made this comment a dozen times before. But, clearly unhappy with having something that was actually fun to deal with, Damien kept the ball rain attack from Phase 1. It still sucks. If Lotus's abilities came together to form this complex and dynamic moveset that I found to be really fun to fight against, Damien's abilities come together to form this incredibly janky and annoying moveset that never really works together, such that I never had any fun with the boss. Moves like Damien's Claw Dash or Dive Bomb have a ridiculously long wind-up, making dodging them easy. Meanwhile, the Sword Dash is way too fast to dodge unless you're just not attacking while he starts up the animation, and you can't space it out as per Lotus's punch. The Flying Sword moves erratically to the point that dodging it just isn't worth it in terms of the lost DPM, and it doesn't synergize with his attacks the way the meteors do in Lotus. You could argue that the zoning from the sword sticking in the ground synergizes with some of Damien's other attacks, such as the Dive Bomb, Claw, or Ball Rain, which it does, but the difference is that with Lotus, you can see all of the meteors and where they're going to land well ahead of time. Meanwhile, again, you have no idea when the sword is going to stick itself in the ground, and again, there is no method of baiting it out and getting it to stick into the ground, and again, when the sword does dive for you, it will very often just not stick in the ground several times in a row, all of which massively reduces your ability to play around it effectively. In general, I found the attack patterns to be so much less cohesive, there's so much less room for effective counterplay, and it made the moment-to-moment gameplay of Damien so much less fun when compared to Lotus. And it's like, come on. Story-wise, I find Damien to be such an interesting character. Like, I'm playing as the demon, you know? This is my whole thing. But yeah, whatever. Lotus good, Damien bad. On to the next hurdle. But before that, once you hit level 200, you unlock the Arcane River, which is basically where the game starts. There are 6 main areas, 3 having sub-areas, which you unlock throughout levels 200 to 240. With all of them being quite long, and a lot of them not being very good, I'll spare you most of the details. After you complete the first area, Vanishing Journey, you jump off a cliff, landing on the back of a flying fish, who carries you on into the 10th circle of hell, Choo Choo Island. Quite frankly, on every other character I made, this was my roadblock. The music, the visuals, everything about it just eroded my ability to continue playing. Now, you might be thinking, "Aww, but they're so cute, and the song is so happy and cheerful," but if you had to spend hours on end staring at these literal abominations while having choo 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 in your ear constantly, well, I, at the very least, began to very quickly despise it. And keep in mind, these sub-areas, Reverse City and Yum Yum Island, did not exist when I previously played the game. So if I wanted to farm, I either had to deal with choo 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 choo, or go all the way back to Vanishing Journey, where my EXP and miso rates would be way worse. And on that note, it honestly pissed me off how good Yum Yum Island is compared to Choo Choo. Like, seriously, compare Iliard Moor, one of the loveliest BGMs I've ever heard.
Choo choo, choo 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 choo, choo 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 choo, choo choo choo.
As a developing tradition, Flying Fish the Goat carries you on into the next area, Lachalin? I don't know. This one was pretty alright. You face off against a former Black Mage commander, Wucid, whose sprite and character art look really good. By the way, you're not staring at a black screen right now because your monitor suddenly died or anything like that, but rather because that's all OBS recorded. Sucks to suck, I guess. Next up, of course, Flying Fish is always got my back, carries me on into Arcana, the next area, and yeah, whatever, it's gorgeous, the BGM is amazing. Nothing interesting happens. Next up, Flying Fish carries us into the morass, and can speak now? The story was actually pretty interesting, especially since I'd done the Critias storyline, thought it was very good, and was very upset when it got cut off out of nowhere so I could do some god-awful dailies instead. Unfortunately, Morass also contains one of the worst boss fights I've ever seen, in which you go up against Arcarium, but instead of actually fighting him, you just have to not die for 60 seconds, after which you just lose by default anyway. As for Asphera, I was pretty blown away by the fact that I actually had people helping me now instead of being tasked with solo clearing Black Mage commanders all by myself. And finally, Celis, where it's all like, oh, we have to go after this necklace that this lady dropped. And yeah, whatever, it literally never comes up again. The BGM for the upper area is really nice though. In any case, by clearing their associated Arcane River areas, we unlocked the bosses from whom we could acquire our Arcane Umbra gear, Wucid and Will. First up on the chopping block was Wucid, whose Phase 1 is terrible. Sorry to interrupt myself, but Wucid's Phase 1 is terrible. See, I originally had this whole segment where I broke down almost all of Wucid's moves, taking a really deep dive into all the problems I had with it, but ultimately coming to the conclusion that, overall, Wucid's pretty alright. However, said segment was written entirely under the impression that they finally fixed the bug where someone had accidentally swapped out the golems with a giant sack of tungsten anvils, because you'd just die instantly if they fell on you. Often unreactably, because the fight looks like this, and the summoning animation for golems is identical to that of several other moves she uses very regularly. I realize now that dying instantly to golems falling on you was not only never fixed, it was never a bug to begin with. I realize that it must have been the result of pure dumb luck that this never happened to me in the first couple of times I fought Wucid, luck which eventually ran out, but had a periodic resurgence on the one occasion when I came back to test Wucid after the damage cap on golems was removed. I remember there being one attempt where I died 7 times to a golem being dropped on me in phase 1. 7! There's also been a few times where I died from being teleported inside a golem, and in light of all that very much being things that can still happen, nothing else matters, okay? Not a damn thing. Ooh, the powerful monster is just like Vellum's death laser. Ah, the bomb damage is divided among everyone in the explosion radius. Who cares? This is all that matters. It doesn't matter if the visuals are amazing, or the music is great, or if Phase 2 is actually really good, so long as this remains a feature of this boss. Because so long as it does, it will never, ever claw its way out from the depths of frustrating mediocrity. Or something like that. Yeah, anyways, back to the video. We farmed her a bunch and I got my arcane umbra weapon, on which I rolled a diet version of 3-line attack, and since my BMI is firmly saddled in the overweight category, I decided to keep it. As for Will, yeah, since Will is actually way stronger than Wucid, we never got to the point where you're actually supposed to fight him, because pretty much everybody had quit by then, and I didn't even need to get my arcane umbra gear to comfortably hit 255 anyway. So we only ever made one serious attempt, which we lost. I can tell you, however, from watching Lucy Perrin's Will pattern guide video, that it looks like a whole bunch of gimmicks. Yeah, I'm not too sure about that one. Now, something I'd like to point out is that I really am not all that qualified to talk about Maplestory's MMO mechanics, especially in how they relate to other MMOs, because I've played like 3 others, and one of them is on Roblox. But something I have much more experience in is games with kick-ass boss fights, and let me tell you, coming off the likes of Dark Souls, Dead Cells, and Hollow Knight, I felt that Maplestory's bosses really left a lot to be desired. For starters, the engine is terrible. And yes, I know, I'm just spoiled because Team Cherry and Relogic let me do things like attack while moving or control my character in the air, but that's actually not my problem with it. Yes, I wish Maplestory's movement and combat had the fluidity of these games, but my problem isn't with the engine's limitations, my problem is with so many bosses' attacks seemingly not taking into account the engine's limitations. For example, earlier I went into this a little bit with regards to Damien's Sword Slash, but because of how quick the windup is, and how far it goes, it is literally not consistently dodgeable unless you just don't attack because of how long you're stuck in animation. Now, it was at this point of writing the script where I began to ask myself, why? Why couldn't I just not attack? Especially since in so many other games there are often bosses where I had to learn, okay, I just shouldn't attack them here because it's too risky. To which I had no particular issue, and it took me a very long time to figure out why. See, I'd always felt this sort of external pressure in Maplestory's boss fights, going something along the lines of, if you can hit the boss right now, you should be hitting the boss right now. My problem comes from the time limit. See, in Dark Souls, I like to use the big weapons. The stuff that's slow, but hits like a truck. And I don't have any problem with the ridiculous animation lock that comes attached to them because there's no time limit in those games. In Dark Souls, Hollow Knight, or Dead Cells, there is no time limit in boss fights. You can pretty much take as long as you want. However, to explain why the time limit so thoroughly messes with me, I would first like to explain why it exists, because it does exist for a reason. Effectively unlimited healing. a mechanic all the previously listed games lack. Dark Souls, limited flasks. Hollow Knight, you have to hit the boss to be able to heal. Dead Cells, limited flasks and just extremely limited healing across the board. In fact, you know what? I actually have a really good example to help illustrate what I'm talking about, but you will have to allow me, for a moment, to talk about a game I actually like. Dead Cells is a roguelite, i.e. you run into a dungeon and see how far you can get before you die, unlocking permanent upgrades as you play to help you get farther with each consecutive run. As mentioned before, healing in Dead Cells is extremely limited. Although you can unlock health flasks by progressing through the game, with both your flasks and health being fully refilled at the end of each area, once you beat the final boss you get what's called a boss stem cell, allowing you to further crank up the already significant difficulty of the game. You can repeat this process of beating the final boss, getting a boss stem cell, and cranking up the difficulty up to 5 times, at which point all of the refill stations will be smashed, making the 4 flask charges you start with all you've got to work with. As such, this is around the time when taking advantage of a certain mechanic became far more important for me. When you take damage in Dead Cells, your health is converted to this orange health, called recovery, which quickly decays, but if you deal damage while this health is decaying, you'll regen part of it back. Now, there was a short period of time following the Everyone is Here update, where this item, the Face Flask, would turn a significant percentage of your missing health into recovery. This granted you effectively unlimited healing, because if things were ever looking a little dicey, you could just back off, focus on dodging until the item's off cooldown, smash your head in with it, and then burst an enemy to heal a massive chunk of your HP. Repeat until healthy. By the way, the Face Flask's ability to grant you recovery was removed just a few weeks later. What a surprise. Yeah, it pretty much completely broke the balance of the game's combat, especially in bosses, because without a time limit, having access to what's effectively unlimited healing will allow people to just run away. Quite frankly, Dead Cells is an extremely challenging game, especially once you've unlocked the higher difficulties, and at 150 hours played, I still have not cleared the true final boss, because it's still too difficult for me, despite all the time I've invested in the game. Except, I actually did beat it once. Just once. With the Face Flask, while it still gave you recovery. My previous best involved me getting there on like 70% health with 1 flask charge left, and dying in the first phase. But when I came back with the Face Flask, I cleared it with all 4 flask charges left at almost full health. Because throughout the entire run, whenever I was fighting any enemy, boss or otherwise, if things were looking a little dicey, I'd bash my skull in, heal a bunch of health back, and then back off and focus on dodging until it was off cooldown again. Repeat until healthy. As mentioned before, the devs very quickly patched it, and I haven't been able to beat the boss since. Like I said, it completely broke the combat of the game, because I could just run away and abuse my unlimited healing to never be at serious risk of dying in a fight. However, if there was a time limit, then even with unlimited healing, I wouldn't have the option to just sit back and play it safe while waiting for the most opportune moment to strike. No. I'd have to get in there and brawl. So, if there were no time limit in Maplestory's boss fights, then you would regularly have parties of cracked out teenagers with
peninsular gear
clearing dotus and beyond, because they'd just play it absolutely safe, and clear it in like 90 minutes. How do I know that? Because I'd do that. I am absolutely the type to do that. On my first playthrough of Elden Ring, I did a frame-perfect jump to get into Volcano Manor, and cleared the place out 40 levels below what's recommended, and I'd be extremely surprised to find out that I'm the only person like that on this game. Now, it is worth noting that this becomes much less of an issue once you become stronger and can more comfortably clear bosses, but for me and my friends, when we were doing our first struggle clears, where we regularly ran the clock down to less than 5 minutes, the time limit meant we needed to constantly thrash into the boss, because we're on a time limit. We cannot afford to wait for Damien or whoever to attack before we start hitting them, because we'd all lose by default if the clock hit 0. That is why the engine, in combination with the time limit, ruins so many of the boss fights in Maplestory for me. It means that I can't do my bread and butter formula of playing it safe, waiting for an attack, dodging, and getting some damage in. I had to sit there, spamming attack, and because of the animation lock, many times I ate a golem to the face, or got slashed by Damien, or got mashed into a fine red paste by Gollux. Attacks which I was not reasonably able to dodge because I was stuck in animation, because I was constantly attacking, because otherwise we would lose by default because of the time limit. This is by far my biggest overarching problem with Maplestory's boss design, okay? I'm a counter-attacker in like every game I play. Every single one. Nothing gives me more of an adrenaline rush than perfectly dodging an attack string and getting some good damage off of it. Dodge, swing. Dodge, swing. Dodge, swing. Repeat until I win, or screw up enough to die. And it is only with the exceeding minority of Maplestory's bosses that I'm able to do that. In Lucid Phase 2, her sickle telegraph gives you more than enough time to stop attacking and get ready to dodge. With Lotus's punches, if you maintain a certain distance, you can reliably evade them almost every time, often while still attacking. The majority of the bosses I fought were not like this. And again, my problem is not with the game's engine itself, my problem is with the way these bosses have been designed in the context of the game's engine in combination with the time limit, because it means I cannot play the game in the way that is most fun for me. Because if I try, stuff like this happens. Ah, Von Bon, you thought that pathetic attack would spell the end of me. Why, I'm a professional gamer. Something such as that poses no threat to the likes of me. And now you will suffer the consequences of your avarice! But wait. Yeah, we're not doing the whole intro every time. Time for an interlude. It's time for interlude. It's time to talk about some core character progression mechanics. This time, we're talking about flames. Flames can be used on an item, giving said item random bonuses to random stats. These bonuses can get pretty ridiculous with high-level gear, as the bonuses scale with higher equipment stats and levels. The formulas for how these additions are calculated is pretty complicated, but the summary is they can range from basically useless to extremely strong. And you're generally just gonna roll until you get something good enough, but the rates for doing so admittedly aren't that bad, so whatever. And also... Wait. Did I say the stat bonuses were random? Oh dear. I suppose I should clarify. To be specific, random means you do not use any particular method, so they all have an equal chance of being chosen. Why do I bring this up? Well, on the 18th of February 2021, in the Korean test server patch notes, there was a section which stated all types of additional options flames that items can receive have been changed to have the same rates. And everyone went all, whoa, hold the phone there, buddy. Did they not have the same rates previously? Which, as Nexon themselves would later confirm, they did not. As a side note, there has been some speculation that this change came out when it did because the Korean government had put forward a bill suggesting stricter legal enforcement of variable probabilities in games and their being disclosed. Very interesting, but it is neither my place nor intention to try and convince you that's why this whole debacle began. In any case, there's been quite a lot of discussion and speculation and assumptions and claims about the developers' intentions with regards to this system of weighted probabilities, far beyond the actual statements from Nexon themselves, mind you, and while I don't think it's too difficult to figure out my opinion on the matter, here's the thing. In life, I generally try to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, to take everything at face value and assume nothing. As such, I'm going to work purely off of the statements Nexon themselves have directly put out, and when contradictions arise, I will assume ignorance rather than malice. In doing so, I would like to show you, my dear viewer, that even if we allow Nexon to put their best foot forward, it is still absolutely possible to stomp all over it. let us begin. For starters, allow me to give an in-depth explanation on how the system previously worked. Well, to be honest, I don't really understand how the previous system worked because the wording Nexon gave when describing it was extremely confusing and raised several completely unanswered questions. So I'm basically just gonna regurgitate what Mr. Orange Mushroom Man Max said, since it's definitely at least mostly correct, and he could very easily have a much better understanding than me because I'm not very intelligent. First, choose one of the stats according to the weighted probabilities. That's the first stat selection. Next, remove that stat from the pool and split the list into two sections, above and below the selected option. Third, pick one option from each of these sublists, again according to their weighted probabilities, and do a 50-50 coin flip to see which of these will be chosen as the second stat. Finally, remove that stat from the pool as well, and repeat the process of splitting the list in two, one above and below, choosing a stat from each, coin flipping which one you'd keep, twice over for a third and fourth stat. Now, one of the biggest problems with this system is right here. Jump and all stat are right next to each other at the bottom of the list. This meant whenever jump was picked as a stat, then when the list would be split in two, the only thing below it would be percent all stat, i.e. there's a 50% chance you get percent all stat and a 50% chance for every other option in the pool. As such, one of the best lines you could roll on a flame, one which could be effectively half a potential line added on at max, would be regularly paired with jump, one that is functionally useless. Additionally, with strength all the way at the very top, if it got picked first, since there was nothing above it, the 50-50 would be skipped and the system would just pick any of the stats below it. However, if a stat such as intelligence were picked, well, unless you happen to play one of the 0 int dex or int strength characters, that's a 50% chance right off the bat that you're gonna get a stat you literally don't use, with similar cases for luck and dexterity characters. As you might expect, people were not happy about this, so let's start digging into Nexon's response. After the whole test server bit, a letter from the director was subsequently put out in which they disclosed the internal logic, apologized, and explained themselves with the following. From the beginning of Maplestory's service, the word random has been used in-game as a collective term for the act of determining a result by generating a random number according to set conditions. Therefore, when describing probability-type items or systems which determine results with fixed weights, the word random was used. Now, a lot of people looked at this and said, that's BS, you deliberately designed the flame system to slow down player progression and misled everybody by describing it as random. But, of course, I am not here to reiterate that statement, for one because I actually kind of disagree, but also because I would like to allow Nexon to put their best foot forward. And interestingly enough, their statement is actually consistent with their previous actions. See, back in April of 2018, Nexon was fined by the Korean Free Trade Commission because they'd used the term random to describe a system of loot boxes which had weighted probabilities, supposedly going as low as 0.5% for one of the items out of a pool of 16. On which they gave the comment, in our puzzle event, we used the phrase random provision to suggest the items would be provided at random and that the odds of obtaining each puzzle piece were different. However, the FTC interpreted the phrase as suggesting equal odds. We plan to work on obtaining an additional review of this issue in the future. The last statement of which honestly makes me believe Nexon thinks they'd done nothing wrong. But, of course, ignorance does not equate to innocence. So let's break this down. In this hat, I have a bunch of slips of paper, all of which have a number between and including 1 to 10 written on them. And I would like you, my dear viewer, to pick a number in your head, and a number will be chosen randomly by me. Well, have you got a number? Here I go. And 1. Is that your number? Well, statistically, probably not, since according to Alex Bellos' The Grapes of Math, it's almost tied with 10 as the least common out of that pool. However, what if I told you that all of those numbers didn't have an equal presence in this hat, and instead I took the previously mentioned data and distributed their presence inversely proportional to their commonality? How would you feel about that? Well, Actually, you probably wouldn't feel very much of anything at all, because there were basically zero stakes. But what if you'd been spending money on this? Would you be upset then? If so, why? I picked a number randomly, just like I said. Random, of course, suggesting that the number would be chosen at random, and that the odds of each number being chosen were different. You can see the problem here, right? The commonly accepted definition of random is something along the lines of, you do not use any particular method, so they all have an equal chance of being chosen. And so, when you describe something as random to someone, the majority of people will not think that in any way suggests that the odds of any option being picked would be different. However, Nexon's stance prior to this, as taken directly from them, is they used random as a blanket statement to refer to anything which involved determining a result through a system of chance. So, Nexon, if those are the words by which you are going to defend yourself, then I shall respond as such. Who the hell operates on that definition of random? Who? Not anyone I know, that's for sure. And considering how furious the player base was when this all happened, clearly they are of the same mind. And you know what? It seems like Nexon has figured out the problem too, considering they referred to their behavior as embarrassing. Which it most definitely was, by the way. Their case is, of course, worsened by the fact that in July of 2019, a player filed a support ticket noting how jump and percent all stat were very frequently paired together. Now, I can't read Korean, but Mr. Reddit man Seagull can, and apparently the response from Nexon went something like this. Greetings from Maplestory. Because you asked a detailed question regarding flames, we have investigated thoroughly. As a result of the investigation, we have concluded that there is no unintended behavior regarding flames. Additionally, the existence of a certain stat option does not decide the probability of another stat option. Thank you. Of course, this is well and truly contradicted in every sense of the word by Nexon revealing that the existence of a certain stat option most definitely had a hand in determining the probability of another stat option. They explained themselves by saying they were not able to determine the error at the time. Now, after the sudden attack fiasco, which had happened over a year prior, mind you, you'd think they'd be a little more vigilant when it comes to searching for systems with weighted probabilities attached, but no, we couldn't find it at the time. At worst, they deliberately lied to their player base, and at best, they are completely and utterly incompetent. In fact, overall, even if you take out the possibility of deliberate malice, you give Nexon the benefit of the doubt, you say, yes, I believe you, I believe everything you're saying, then the only option that remains is complete and utter incompetence. And if that's the best you can hope for, not a good look. So yeah, Nexon and their game's reputation got dragged through the dirt, and they gave out a bunch of stuff as compensation, none of which is really worth mentioning other than Sherbet. Sherbet was a special pet rolled out as compensation, but was actually a gateway drug. Unlike normal pets, which can only pick up items they directly walk over, Sherbet can do this. It shouldn't surprise you to hear that going back to a regular pet after Sherbet felt terrible. But here's the thing, Sherbet only lasted 90 days. Yeah, like any good drug dealer, they gave you a taste just to get you hooked, and then rolled out vac pets on reboot for $100 a pop with a $14 a month subscription to be able to use it after 30 days. It's just... Okay, yeah, I don't know about that one. Also, fun fact, since I don't play on Steam, I have literally no means of knowing how long I've played, which is especially confusing since they literally record how long each of your play sessions last, yet seem to have neglected adding a feature that tallies it all up for each character. As such, I started using a logbook to track how much I've played on each character, so I could see just how much of my life I wasted on this. In any case, even though my will to keep playing seriously tapered off after the first couple months, with it being a real struggle to convince myself to grind out the EXP to get the job done, I eventually made it to the final stretch before the Black Mage, Tenebris, broken down into 3 sub-areas you reach at level 245, 250, and 255. First up, Moonbridge. Cygnus' new sprite and character art look badass, and the VFX and BGM for all these maps are awesome. Like, honestly, I was genuinely really hyped to get into this stage of the game, because when the white spear pulled into view, that's when it really hit me like, dude, we're gonna go fight the Black Mage! After 24 hours of more grinding. So yeah, after facing off against the giant monster Gloom and killing him in 2 seconds because of how terrible boss health scaling is in the story, I then proceeded to not play the game for several months at a time, and instead waited for events and EXP potions to push me past 250, because I wasn't interested in doing the previously mentioned 24 hours of grinding. Thus, I could now advance into the Labyrinth of Suffering. A very apt name, I must say. Honestly, I kinda just found this one to be funny. I mean, sure, there were a lot of genuinely really cool moments throughout the story, but every time I had to watch this game's 19-year-old engine choke on itself as it struggled to animate things properly, it just completely destroyed my immersion every single time. And let me tell ya, it happened a lot. Like, oh wow, I wonder what's gonna happen when I walk in here. So basically, the entire time Hill has been using magic and illusions to try and make us depressed and or go insane. Lady, this is just another day on the job for me. In any case, Best Girl comes in to save the day, like, twice, and we kill Varicella, and escaping the labyrinth, we enter the final area, Limina, after a couple dozen more hours of raw grinding. Yeah, getting to Limina was a really long final stretch, because at level 250, the amount of EXP you need per level doubles. I.e., getting to 255 from 250 would be a similar amount of work to getting to 250 from 240, and I already hated that grind even though I'd skipped half of it with growth potions. But now, I'd have to do all of it myself. And combine that with how much I really just wanted this to all be over at this point. Well, let's just say that the time between me getting to 250 and to 255 was 9 months. Are you sure you want to quit? Yes! Yes, I do. Please let me out. Even so, I kept going. I leveled, and I leveled, and I leveled, and I leveled. And with around 990 hours invested into my main, and 1202 in total, I'd made it to the end. At long last, unlocking the final piece of the Black Mage's story, finally hitting 255 after a 15.5 hour long grind session on April 26, 2022, 686 days after my journey had begun. Yatta! First thing in, the music is groovy and Orchid is here? Hell yeah. Seriously though, the theme for the first area of Limina is an absolute super banger, but here's what kept getting me. I'd be progressing through the area just jamming out to Tears of the World. When all of a sudden, they'd cut it off to start playing the Elite Boss theme from like almost a decade ago. And let me tell you, I stopped taking these people seriously at level 210 as soon as I realized that I couldn't get clean slate scrolls to sell on the auction house on reboot. As such, they'd actually just become a massive inconvenience for my grinding sessions, as it was extremely annoying to be farming away, only to be met with warning, 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 and then having to wait 30 seconds for their invisible damage ignore to go away, and then another 30 for the reward stage to end. Nothing from which I had any significant use for by the time I got Krog gear. Did you know that? Did you know that? As such, hearing them cut off Tears of the World so they could bring these guys into the mix, like, I could not contain myself, okay? And they do it like 4 times. Absolutely hilarious. Anyways, we run into Guard Captain Darknell, who I beat in like 10 seconds because boss health scaling in the story is terrible, blah blah blah. Whatever. And Orchid gets a glimpse of this, the Giant of Light. And yeah, I get that this is supposed to be like a really cool and impressive moment, which admittedly it was, but at the time, all I could think was this. Hey, yo, they got Elden Beast in this game? Yeah, anyways, Flying Fish comes in and carries us to the final showdown. This was it. I'd finally made it to the gates of the Black Mage's throne. But at the cost of Flying Fish? No! As for the Black Mage's fight itself, well, it's about on par with Elden Beast, I'd say. In any case, I beat the Black Mage to a pulp along with the help of Orchid, who collapses at the start of Phase 4? I just lost Flying Fish. I'm not about to lose Best Girl too. I beat the boss and, oh, thank the heavens, she's fine. Plus, Flying Fish is back too? Let's go! Honestly, from a writing standpoint, really not that great. Not that great at all, with a lot of stuff that was just like, what are you talking about? Where is this coming from? Why is this happening? And so on. But I didn't care. I really didn't, because it gave me my catharsis. Well, mostly. I still want more Orchid content. But other than that, that was it. Black Mage story done. I was free. But you have eyeballs. You can see the progress bar. We're not even close to done here. Before we get into more of the serious stuff, though, I'd like to go over some of the little things, starting with my guild, theSHWAGS. Although I've never really had much of an interest in guilds, as mentioned before, I did create one for me and my friends to run bosses together. Although a lot of situations generally boiled down to us laughing at the boss, it was admittedly still a very fun experience. And overall, we got up to some pretty funny little shenanigans throughout our run. On one occasion, my friend got on his character Miku Nakano with a 1 for an eye, and pretended to be an e-girl so that he could get hungry Muto carries. Initially, I made fun of him for it, but honestly, I've come to respect it. You gotta do what you gotta do. Additionally, this was his first time playing Maplestory, so there was a lot of unspoken, sort of social etiquette that he wasn't aware of. For example, when he made it to Vanishing Journey at level 200, one of the first things he did was immediately start KSing some guy and laughing about it. For this, he was awarded Eternal Glory in our guild's intro message. And while I am personally responsible for reducing his fame across his 2 characters by like 6 or 7 total, I'll have you know the rest of it was hard-earned through his own efforts. Another one of my friends also tried to switch mains like 9 times. You see this list? Every single character in this box is from the same guy. The same guy. And every single time he made a new character, he'd be like, Ethan, carry me craw, man. I need it for my new main. I swear it'll be the last time. I swear. But yeah, overall, I'm really glad a lot of my friends joined me on my journey because it made it a hell of a lot more fun. As a side note, there's this phrase which I invented with the specific intent of using it to deal with my friend who would constantly brag about his Maplestory accomplishments, and I would like to pass it unto you. See, he'd always come into call all like,
Oh, guys, I hit level 206, Ethan, I hit 206,
But let me tell ya, as soon as I started hitting him with the, that's awesome for you, it was no longer a thing that I had to deal with. This isn't like a joke, by the way. It's a genuine request. Start using this phrase. Because while I might have just been using it to poke some fun at my friend, looking back on it, it is like surgically designed to deal with the infestation of people on the internet who are all like, actually, and then go on to explain how they're some sort of genius, or who just generally don't shut up about how awesome they are, because it perfectly relays the message that nobody cares. Now, while you can't quite match the verbal delivery via text, starting every word with a capital and ending with an exclamation mark honestly might be even more toxic. Anyways, to get back to the video, there's this thing called Friend Story, the first Maplestory spin-off, as they call it, where a whole bunch of Maplestory's characters have become students and staff at Shinsu High School. Now, during the second chapter, you acquire Orchid's phone number, and this unlocks a secret mission to get a special chair featuring Orchid. And as the chieftain of the Orchid fan club, I had to get it. There's only one problem. The requirements for getting this thing are absolutely ridiculous. You have to call Orchid every day between 8 to 9 p.m. UTC for 30 consecutive days. And if you miss a single day, you have to restart from the beginning. Oh, and you bet server maintenance times regularly cut straight through this time slot. And yeah, get Nexoned, buddy. Oh, what's that? You live in a time zone where you need to go to unreasonable efforts to even make this call? Well, sucks to be you. Let's say, for example, you live in a sort of relatively unpopulated, niche time zone, such as the Eastern Standard Time Zone, home to nearly half the population of the contiguous United States and over 60% the population of Canada. This time zone will translate to 3 to 4 p.m., or 4 to 5 p.m. during daylight savings time, or in other words, if you work a 9 to 5, it is reasonably impossible for you to complete this quest. And even if you're part-time, you'd still be pretty hard-pressed to not have a single shift cut through this 1 hour time window that's barely in the early evening for 30 consecutive days. And if you're a student, then it's not unusual to have multiple weekly classes paving right over it as well. And all this, of course, also applies to the Central, Mountain, and Pacific time zones, or in other words, almost the entirety of the North and South American continents. And that only covers the people in the Americas. There are perfectly reasonable reasons for someone in, say, Europe to miss the time window as well. Like, imagine it's 7 p.m. in London and your friends are asking if you want to hit the pub for the night, but you're all like, sorry bruv, I've got to make a call to a fictional character in a video game in an hour. That wasn't even close to British. Of course, you could do something like bring a laptop with you with Maplestory installed and then call Orchid during your lunch break or something. But like, why should you have to do that? It's ridiculous. Like, everything about getting this chair is ridiculous. I get that it's supposed to be like, oh, you're supposed to show your dedication to Orchid, but it is completely irrepresentative of what that dedication actually requires. This quest requires you to abandon any real-life commitments you may have so you can be logged into Maplestory, so you can call a fictional character on a fictional phone for a few minutes of a specific 1 hour window for 30 straight days. Far and above the effort required to just call someone every day. And if I wasn't a student on summer break who was overly dedicated to the game at the time, I absolutely would not have gotten the chair. And you know what? Yes, it is lovely. It really is. It's the best damn chair in the game, with this one as a close second and this slotting in at third. But my love for Orchid is not so blinding that I cannot see how ridiculous the process of getting this chair is. Also, since I'm already complaining, why are Irina and Oz here? Like, cool characters and all. I'm a fan, to be honest, but this is Orchid's chair, man. Orchids, get out of here! And, yeah, I don't really know how to segue back into the serious stuff, so here comes a non sequitur. It's time for an interlude, it's time for an interlude, blah 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 blah. We're talking about Star Force. Star Force is absolutely despicable. Basically, you spend misos for flat stat additions to your gear, with greater stat bonuses rendered to higher level gear. You spend an initial miso cost to attempt a star upgrade, which you will either fail or succeed, with you losing the money either way. The chances of your success decreases with each subsequent star, dropping down to absurdly small rates for the highest star force bonuses. Now, for the first 10 stars, although you can fail, you can simply attempt the same upgrade again, over and over until you succeed. For upgrades beyond 10 stars, however, your equipment will derank by a star if you fail, and beyond 12, there's even a chance for the item to be destroyed upon failure. While you can safeguard your equipment to prevent it from being destroyed, it doubles the cost of each attempt, and generally is not worth it. Plus, you're not even allowed to safeguard once you get to the stars where the destruction chance is actually really high, i.e. once you get to the point where safeguarding actually becomes really valuable, you're not allowed to safeguard anymore. Star forcing is horrendous. Okay, you're literally just spinning the wheel until you get a lucky streak and hit a 30% chance like several times in a row. And the costs of star forcing get so unbelievably high that you could have the most optimal grind sesh, whapped up, bonus miso gear and familiars online, get like 1.7 billion from it, and maybe pay for a single 22-star attempt. Not a 22 star, mind you. The average cost for that is like 14 billion per item. You'll get an attempt. And according to the statistics, the most likely outcomes of that attempt are either booming or just running out of money. To me, star forcing feels like it was designed with the specific intent of making player progression as unenjoyable as possible. Like, you drop a star when you fail past 10, and your success rate past 10 stars is less than 50% and decreasing. If you boom your item, you have to get a new copy to repair it, from which point you're back to 12 stars. No pity, no nothing. You just gotta roll again and hope Lady Luck smiles down upon you this time around. And keep in mind, while you do have star checkpoints at 10, 15, and 20 stars, where even if you fail, you won't drop a rank, at every other star you will drop. And at 20 stars, for example, you're still gambling for the 30% upgrade chance to 21 several times in a row, all the while juggling the 7% destruction chance with each attempt. And each attempt itself, each roll of the dice is like a 1/10 of a 2-hour grind session gone. And that's not even mentioning the effort required to get there. You can and will spend billions just bouncing around 15 to 19 stars, never hitting the 20-star checkpoint, because hey, that's how the bell curve works. Sometimes you get to 20 stars with basically zero effort, sometimes you spend billions to get absolutely nowhere. And it's like, what kind of sadist designs a progression system where you can lose progress? Like, let me tell you something.
Oh my. Oh my god. Please. Alright. Okay then.
You see this? This isn't rewarding or satisfying or enjoyable in any capacity, okay? This isn't even remotely close to the joys of character progression. This is excruciating. Now, there is quite a lot of content that's exclusive to the global Maplestory server, and the general trend I noticed was that GMS content is absolutely terrible, but it provides you with absolutely overloaded, broken-ass equipment that, in some cases, completely outshines what the Korean-based game provides. To start, Gollux is a god-awful boss across the board, 1 out of 10. I'm not going to explain why in detail because I'm tired of doing boss breakdowns, but it is definitely one of the worst extended boss experiences I've ever had. It is insanely annoying, insanely buggy, not even a little bit fun, and a couple months in, they removed my ability to sit in my orchid chair while waiting for my burst buffs to come off cooldown in the heart. Quite frankly, the only reason it gets a 1 instead of a 0 is because they got rid of the pre-quests. But guess what? Of your 24 equipment slots, 5 of the best in slot items come from Gollux, and the 4-set superior set bonus gives you 30% ignore enemy defense and 30% bonus boss damage. So go do it. Additionally, getting Sweetwater equipment is one of the most boring video game experiences I've ever had. You have to do these trade runs where you sail back and forth between two locations selling stuff for a slight markup from what you bought it for. It's like, whoa, buy stuff where it's cheap, sell it where it's expensive. It's just like the Silk Road. You're literally just sitting there waiting for like 3 or 4 minutes at a time, and you have to do it like 5 times a day. It is honestly so bad that I straight up just ran a Lotus mark and a Dominator pendant instead of their Sweetwater equivalents, because I had zero intention of transposing them onto their Sweetwater equivalents, and then possibly booming and having to replace them by doing more trade runs. Speaking of transposition, Sweetwater equipment really isn't all that great on its own, but it has this mechanic called transposition, where you can take the flame and starring stats from a level 140 to 159 piece of equipment that occupies the same slot, and then just slap it onto the Sweetwater equivalent. You'll even get a free star worth of stats in the process, because transposition reduces the star level by 1, but it still keeps the stats. Now, in case you haven't noticed, I'm really not a fan of these gimmick mechanics, but admittedly, it's not too big a deal with Sweetwater since, well, as I said, I just ran a Dominator pendant and Lotus mark instead of their Sweetwater equivalents, and I'm really not losing out on that much for it. But that is not the case with Gollux. Gollux is an absolute blight upon this game. Because of Gollux, 2 of the pitched boss equips, ultra rare equipment drops from the latest of late game bosses, the Dreamy Belt and Commanding Force Earrings, were like obsolete on release in GMS, because you'd have to sacrifice the superior Gollux 4 set in order to equip either of them. And as far as I'm aware, like, that is not worth it. And keep in mind, by the end of my journey, I had just about gone to the strength where I could probably clear Hard Wucid, who drops the Dreamy Belt, if there were like 9 of me, and it'd probably take about a year or so of consistent progress from where I stopped playing, getting 5-set Arcane Umbra and 21 starring pretty much everything to be able to clear Hard Darknell, who drops the Commanding Force Earrings. Meanwhile, I could comfortably farm Gollux for the superior equips by the time I had acquired my full Absolab set back in September 2020. And then there's Princess No, who perfectly encompasses one of the things that I absolutely despise about this game. While it's reflected in bits and pieces through mechanics like damage reflect and damage ignore, Princess No has condensed it into its purest, most insufferable form. Why do so many things in this game insist upon wasting my time? Why do you only do 10 damage to Mikagami? Why does Mikagami teleport you all over the arena constantly? Why are all these Oda Warriors and Electric Eels damage capped at 100? Why does it take almost a full minute of waiting here before the spear guy jumps down? What is the point of any of that? Princess No felt like it only took inspiration from the worst aspects of this game and then iterated and innovated upon it to make it even worse. Like, a 20-second damage reflect or ignore where you just have to sit there doing nothing is infinitely preferable to Mikagami, and at least you never have to wait as long as you do with the Raiden Shogun or whatever his name is. Princess No is a terrible boss, but she drops duplicates of a best-in-slot ring, so go do it. Now, admittedly, it's not all terrible. Monad, for one, actually has a really good story other than how your character is written, because for some reason GMS content wants to go down the route of your character being written as a giga cringe hero. But the major stuff is absolutely awful. And on that note, let's talk about kanna. For those of you who are so blissfully unaware, kanna has a skill known as Kishin, which has had a long and eventful history, but for the majority of its existence, it has acted as a monster spawn booster, significantly increasing the maximum number of mobs on a map and significantly decreasing the respawn time for those mobs. I think the addition of Kishin was one of the worst game design decisions I have ever heard of. Like, I actually cannot believe they allowed this to be added to the game. I swear, at the point of the ability's addition, hadn't hunting monsters been the predominant method of leveling and miso farming for years? even if you couldn't foresee the possibility that people would just start using 2 computers, you know, one on their kanna boosting the spawn rates, and one on their main killing everything, and you know what, maybe this is just my inexperience with MMOs showing, but like, is adding something that so massively disrupts the balance of farming capability between characters not a terrible idea? It's not as if Kanna's farming is terrible and they need Kishin to make up for it. In fact, from what I've seen, Kanna is one of the best farmers in the game even without Kishin. Oh, and if you ever change or remove it, people are going to be quite understandably upset, because regardless of whether or not it's a healthy mechanic for the game, they've gotten used to the farming rates that you gave them, and going back to the default is going to feel terrible, especially since Kishin has been an extremely strong farming tool, despite repeated nerfs, mind you, since December of 2013. So just a small percentage of the player base have put quite a lot of time, and probably also money, into their kannas. It seriously never should have been added to the game to begin with, because now the rest of the game has to be balanced with it in mind, despite not everyone being able to make use of its benefits. That's the main problem with Kishin, by the way. It so thoroughly thrashed the GMS economy that the entire game had to be adjusted to match. That's why we have totems, and that's why we have like 75% Star Force prices compared to the Korean server. Like, it's literally kanna inflation, because everyone has to deal with these increased prices regardless of whether or not they even have a kanna to farm at their ludicrous rates. Oh? What's that? You played kanna one time a couple years ago and found it so boring that you barely even made it to level 30? Well, get Nexoned, kiddo, because you've still got to deal with the insane price hikes that they've created. In fact, you want to hear my opinion? My extremely biased and possibly also uninformed opinion? I think that at the time, the GMS devs wanted their exclusive content to be so cool and awesome and powerful, and so they stapled all this overtuned garbage onto it at the expense of the entire game surrounding it. Regardless, in response to the final nail in Kishin's spawn-enhancing coffin, with it now being reduced to a plus 10% EXP modifier, many people have suggested a blanket increase to monster spawns or even just EXP and miso drops to match Kishin's previous rates. While I don't think this is ever going to be implemented, due to GMS very clearly being pushed in the direction of becoming just a copy-paste of the Korean server, I still support it, because if you do that, then you could even get rid of Okay, stop the music, the bit's over. But, to be honest, I've been waiting for this. See, I despise these things. Everything about them, truly, and the majority of my fellow schwags are in agreement on this. In fact, a few of my friends started calling them T-words, claiming their full name was too traumatic for them to hear. In any case, T-words are definitely the thing I hated most about this game. See, in an attempt to alleviate the damage Kanna had done to the game's overall balance, Nexon added T-words to the game. An item which, when equipped, would allow you to summon this big blue brick onto the map, granting the exact same spawn-enhancing effects as Kishin. This was the lifeline for any non-Kanna farmer, but since they expire after 2 hours, and since you're severely rate limited in how many T-words you can get per month, you'd better make the most of those 2 hours. And that, by the way, is the reason why I held so much malice towards Kanna farmers. They could get on, farm for like 17 minutes, and get off the game. Kishin doesn't care. Kishin doesn't have a time limit. You can just place it and it'll be there for as long as you want it. They could DC in the middle of farming and be fine. Take a 10-minute break in the middle of farming and be fine. They could literally be farming completely and optimally and be fine. They don't have the invisible hand of Nexon clawing at the back of their mind going, you only get 17 T-words per month, you know. You had to spend half an hour doing weekly bosses to get the rewards points to afford this, you know. You better make the most of it. Better be at 100% focus the entire time, pathing and farming optimally. Bathroom breaks, water breaks, anything breaks? Forsaken! You must farm for 2 hours straight! Like, why? Why does it have to be 2 hours? 2 hours! Like, you're literally just jumping in a circle, pressing the same buttons over and over and over again for 120 minutes! Like, that's a long time, you know? That's a 1/12 of a day! It is such a brain-rotting experience. Man, that felt good. Let me tell you something though. T-words aren't the only culprit here, they're just the main culprit. WAPs, bonus EXP and miso coupons, pretty much anything that requires you to be farming for a certain amount of time to make the most of it, that is what I hate about farming in this game, because it means I cannot play at my own pace if I want to make the most of the resources available to me. So, here's an idea, and yeah, that's right, I'm not just gonna complain about this and move on as I've done with pretty much everything previous. I'm actually gonna make a suggestion. Make it so everything from T-words to guild buffs to monster perk potions are toggles. And so whenever you use a new guild buff, or T-word, or WAP, or whatever, instead of giving you its own individual item, or being activated for a certain period of time, it adds its use time to the time limit of that toggle. For example, the first time you use a T-word coupon, it would grant you a use item, which, when toggled on, would grant you all the current effects of a T-word, and the time limit of 2 hours would start counting down. However, the time limit will only count down while the toggle is activated, so you could farm for, say, 12 minutes, then turn the toggle off, and you'll still have 108 minutes left of your T-word that you can make use of later. And for every subsequent T-word coupon you use, it'll still be consumed as per usual, but instead of giving you a new 2-hour toggle, it'll add 2 hours to your already existing toggle's time limit, so it'll have 228 minutes of use time left instead of 108. Do this for like everything, absolutely everything. WAPs, G-buffs, monster perk potions, EXP and miso coupons, everything people consistently use, add a system like this for it. In fact, there's already a similar system in place for these snail pets, which have a use time limit instead of an expiry date, so implementing this really should not require all that much effort. Regardless, with this, you could truly be unshackled. You could farm under optimal conditions whenever you wanted, for however long you wanted. With the only real exception being runes. Hell, you could even add like a tab for item macros, just like how there's skill macros. For example, you could put the toggle items for a 2x EXP coupon, WAP, T-word, golden green pot, and Legion wealth coupon all on an item macro, and then be able to turn all of them on and off with the press of a single button. And again, this literally reuses technology that's already in the game, so I don't see it being that much effort to implement. Yeah, you know, there's a ridiculous, and I mean ridiculous amount of cut content from this video. And, well, the main reason for that is because if I talked about everything I wanted in the level of detail I wanted, this video would be 7 hours long. There were several additional factors case by case, and for a few of them, it essentially boiled down to, what is the point of saying this? With them being major overhauls or suggestions for how Nexon could improve their game. Because I know I'm kind of just speaking into a void. Like, oh, Nexon should invest in rebuilding the entire game from the ground up in a Hollow Knight-esque engine. Like, that is not happening. Yes, sure, it would have some of the best boss fights in any game if they did that, but it's not happening. But the system I just described about item toggles and item macros and all that, That survived to the final draft of the script because it's one of the few suggestions I had that I actually think has a decent shot. Because, like I said, all the technology pretty much exists in the game already, and I really cannot see any argument for this not being a massive quality of life upgrade, and I don't think it harms Nexon financially in any capacity either, which is a very important factor to consider in this. So, yeah, whatever, moving on. Legion and Link skills. There are a lot of characters in Maplestory, but chances are there are going to be just a few that you enjoy playing much more than all the others, and so the incentives you've been given to not put every single second of your time into those very few characters are Legion and Link skills. Every character has a Link skill, granting certain passive bonuses to that character, leveling up when you hit level 120, and for some classes, again at 210. At level 70, you can transfer that Link skill to another character, granting those same passive bonuses to them, and you can have up to 12 Link skills linked to a single character at a time. Additionally, as you level multiple characters, you will eventually unlock the Legion, a grid where you can place your characters as pieces to grant you various stat bonuses. The strength of your Legion, as well as how much of the board is available to you, depends on your Legion rank, which is the sum of your 40 highest level characters. With the general standard most people will recommend you aim for is an 8k Legion, translating to 40 level 200 characters. Other people will say to just get to 6k to unlock the whole board, since all the really good stats are in the outer rings. There's also people like Sacrix who go for a 10k Legion, translating to 40 level 250 characters. And then there's me, who hates grinding Link and Legion mules with every drop of blood in my body, who got his arcane Umbra weapon with a 3k Legion. But before I start complaining, I'd like to list off some positives. For one, with regards to giving people incentives to go out and play lots of different characters, Legion and Link skills genuinely do a really good job. The majority of Link skills are quite good, and not every character will use the exact same ones, so it encourages exploring different options depending on what you're looking for. Furthermore, you can't stack links from multiple of the same character, and although you can put duplicates of the same character on your Legion grid, there's a special Legion bonus stat you only get once per active character on your grid, so it's much more efficient to play a variety of characters. Chances are, a lot of people have ended up finding their main, or at least just a character that they really enjoyed playing in the process of making mules. And even if they don't enjoy a specific character all that much, at least they'll be getting some global stats out of it. And yeah, that's cool. My problem with these systems has very little to do with the actual mechanics of Legion and Link skills themselves. My problem boils down to these two words: content replayability. Personally, I found grinding mules to be boring. Like, unbelievably boring. The process involved doing the same thing, just jumping around a map farming, very often on the exact same maps across multiple characters, over and over and over again. Let me tell you something. Time is the most valuable thing in the universe, and so when I spend more than half of my waking hours grinding out a Legion mule where all I'm doing is going to the same map as 7 other characters prior, doing the same things over and over and over, like, I cannot stand how mindless it is, and it's especially bad if I'm playing a character that I don't enjoy. If I'm going to replay content, it better be damn good. In fact, here's a fun little The Degenerator factoid for ya. I've beaten Dark Souls 3 like over a dozen times. You wanna know why? Because I think it's fun. Because the very act of playing the game is fun for me. Because I find the mechanics to be engaging and exciting, and grinding out a mule in Maplestory does not even come into the realm of that for me. Like, I'm down for a little mindless gaming here and there. It feels nice to do a little brainless task and get a little thing done, get that nice dopamine kick. I like that as much as anyone else, alright? But it becomes a serious problem for me when this brainless task stretches on for literal hours of game time. I've heard a lot of people talk about how they really enjoy the feeling of progression that comes along with grinding out mules, and one of my friends in particular talked about how they really enjoyed how it allowed them to just mentally disengage, relax, and grind. And you know what? To each their own, okay? If anything, I'm envious, as that sort of mindset would have made things infinitely easier on my end. Because for me, it's too much, okay? 10 to 20 minutes of brain dead dailies? Sure, fine, a-okay. I do that on like every gacha game. But when it gets to the point where I'm just jumping around a map, killing mobs with the same ability on mechanic for like 6 hours, like, that is too much, okay? For me, that is too much. And breaking it up by playing, say, 10-20 minutes on a mule over the course of several weeks doesn't really help me much either, because now I'm staring down the barrel of playing a character I probably don't like for several weeks. Like, the number of mules I've ever had any real interest in making beyond the allure of their stats is pretty small compared to how many mules you need to take full advantage of these systems. And so, very often I grinded out a character purely because their legion bonus is good, or their link skill is basically required for bossing, despite me absolutely hating their gameplay. Like, at least when I'm doing dailies on my main, I feel like I'm pushing boundaries, you know? I'm reaching onto the realm of content I've yet to see. But when I Terra burn a Wild Hunter, I'm just grinding stats, okay? That's it. And at a certain point, stats aren't worth it to me. Like I've said before, I just didn't bother with the Sweetwater Pendant or Monocle because I hated these stupid trade runs. And while I did put up with Gollux, just because I thought the stats were worth it doesn't mean I enjoyed it. And the same goes for like half of my Legion. And I'd like to note that I really do not have a problem with long games, okay? Like, I read the Fate Stay Night visual novel. Length is a non-issue for me. In fact, I've seen a lot of people complaining about how the biggest problem with Maplestory is how everything just takes so long now. Personally, I disagree. My problem is that I just cannot stand these massive content droughts, where for hours upon hours of game time, the game just doesn't even bother trying to mentally engage me, and it's not giving me a satisfying experience mechanically either. And so, funnily enough, of all the mules I ended up making, the one that I actually genuinely enjoyed was 0. Because the entire thing is just you playing through the story, spaced out with a moderate but very manageable amount of grinding. Like, doing kill quests or these monster park things or whatever to advance their story breaks up the monotony of grinding with little tidbits of information that get the cogs in my head turning, which is more than good enough for me. Like, if all I had to do was just play through the storylines of each Link and Legion character I made, then I would have really enjoyed it. In fact, I did really enjoy the quest lines of all the Link and Legion characters I made. It's just that the majority of their quest lines end at level 75 to 100, which falls, you know, just a bit short of 200. And so on like half of them, I just stopped around level 140. Now, I've alluded to, and in some cases explicitly mentioned on multiple occasions now, that I play Maplestory in large part due to the story, but I've never really explained myself. See, what I like about Maplestory's story is the puzzle. Upon hearing that, you might be thinking something along the lines of, Ethan, what the hell are you talking about? What puzzle? Did you, like, forget to take your meds or something? And the answer to that is, of course, okay, just listen. On their own, the majority of Maplestory's storylines really aren't all that special. But if you've played enough of them, you begin to see the tiny little details they all share come together to form this brilliant, interconnected web of world building. For example, have you ever heard of Ellen Forest? This is a storyline you unlock at level 90, in which you travel back in time to the very early days of Alinea, where you are greeted by an absolutely amazing atmosphere, composed of gorgeous visuals and serene music. Again, playing through the storyline on its own, nothing all that special. You get to run all over the forest doing little tasks to help this little expedition camp sustain itself and survive. Whatever. The questline on its own is just one piece of the puzzle. At some point, you meet a girl named Yuris, who says she's gonna have a daughter and name her after their ship, the Chiron. Now, if you've played an Explorer Pirate, or paid attention during either Black Heaven or Moonbridge, you'll know Chiron is this lady, the Explorer Pirate job instructor. That's another piece of the puzzle. And then, if you've played Aaron and didn't skip the tutorial cutscenes, you'll know that this expedition is the remnants of Athena Pierce's group, who escaped from the Black Mage's warpath in Leafreed. That's another piece of the puzzle. And then, in the Grand Athenaeum, if you play through the White Mage chapter to see the Black Mage's origin story, you'll meet this character named Athenia, the Fairy Queen, who talks about how the White Mage, soon to become the Black Mage, was the only human she ever met that she didn't think was a walking hunk of junk. And later in the Ellen Forest questline, you find out that she's joined the Black Mage's side. Another piece of the puzzle. And then, throughout the entire Ellen Forest questline, you're referred to as Cow. Everyone calls you Cow, acts as if you're Cow, and you just kinda play along with it because you don't really get what's happening, with this presumably being because you look very similar. But then, later, in the Temple of Time, you meet this amnesiac temple keeper, who, after progressing through his storyline, reveals that he is Cow, and he looks exactly like you. That's another piece of the puzzle. And then, at the start of the revamped Explorer questline, a guy named Tess comes up to you and greets you as Cow, to which you're confused, after which he says that the two of you look exactly alike. But guess what? There's more! See, there's a guy named Tess in Ellen Forest who looks extremely similar to this Tess. That's another piece of the puzzle. And slot all those pieces together, and you get to see how intricate, multi-layered, and interconnected all these storylines are. And seeing all these connections, all these little details crisscrossing between different storylines and coming together for major events, that is why I'm so invested in the story. The thing is, though, you need to play a lot of different storylines for this puzzle to even begin forming in your head. I.e., you need to give people an incentive to do these storylines to begin with, to get them invested in the story to begin with. An incentive that doesn't really exist. Now, you might be thinking, wait, what about Legion and Link skills? How is that not an incentive to get people to go out and play different storylines? If so, sorry, but that's because I left my previous statement vague enough for a rebuttal I already had a counter for in an attempt to increase audience engagement. Because while Legion and Link skills are definitely an incentive to go out and level multiple characters, it provides absolutely zero incentive to play their story, excluding the very few cases where you actually have to play a character's storyline to progress, and this of course says nothing of the storylines that aren't even tied to a specific character. The problem is that at pretty much every stage of the game, just grinding mobs is far and above the most efficient method of leveling up, since the extra EXP you get from completing quests is completely outweighed by the time spent reading, or farming bad maps, or traveling, or pretty much any action that isn't just jumping around killing mobs. And the material rewards for completing the exceeding majority of these storylines do not in any way alleviate this. Moreover, the majority of these storylines are pre-200 content, which have been repeatedly trivialized through EXP reduction after EXP reduction. Not to mention events like burning, all of which result in you just tearing through the level ranges where you're supposed to do questlines like Ellen Forest, with no reason to look back beyond the very few storylines which unlock a boss. Since there's rarely ever any sort of alluring reward for completing story content, most players, especially newer ones, generally do not interact with it. For example, two of my fellow SHWAGs were completely new to Maplestory for this run, and, as you might expect, basically did not play a single storyline beyond those that unlocked a boss, or gave some other material reward. And another one of my friends, or actually to be more specific, the guy who got me into Maplestory to begin with 11 years ago, when I gave him a sample of this section of the script as like a little taste, he didn't even know what Ellen Forest was. Now, one could, at this point, pose the question of who cares? Why does it matter that there's no incentive to play the story content? Sure, you might like it, but other people don't really care for it, and as you said before, to each their own, right? And yes, that's true.
Oh yeah, I
Some
think my
people
cousin's quite
really
attractive.
don't care for story content in games and will just skip through it 99% of the time. That is completely fine. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is the game hard-gating progression with hours upon hours of unskippable story content, where you have to have done a whole bunch of other quest lines to have any context for what's happening. See, it must be noted that the depth I'm able to see in Maplestory's storylines by having done so many of them is a two-way street. If you haven't done a lot of them, which many have not, you won't be able to see any of the depth or the connections or really have any idea of what's going on. For example, Black Heaven. This is a seriously bad one because there are like half a dozen quest lines you need to have played to have any idea of who these characters are or what's happening. And remember, you are required to complete it at least once in order to fight Lotus for Absolab gear. For starters, you'll need to have played through the story of at least one resistance class, or have come to Edelstein and done some quests throughout the region to have an understanding of the Black Wings and their occupation of the city, as well as knowing who the main resistance characters are. You will also need to have played through the storylines of one of these three characters to have any idea of who Orchid is, and while this is partially alleviated through the flashback story / memory exploration sequence, there's still a lot of missing information. Mainly, you need to have played through the White Mage chapter to know who the White Mage is, Phantom's tutorial cutscenes to know who these people are, and to have a proper understanding of what's going on here, the Evolution Lab story to know how Orchid got into Resistance custody, a Cygnus Knight or some general Cygnus / Alliance content to know who Cygnus, Nineheart, and the Knight Captains are, an Explorer or some general Victoria Island content to know who Athena Pierce and Chiron are, one of the characters who harasses Francis to know who he is and about his undying love for Orchid, and any questline where the seal stones are explained for the ending where you're revived to make any sense. Now, you obviously don't have to do everything, and it's exceedingly unlikely that you'll have done nothing, but it's still a problem, and I'd be willing to bet that the majority of people playing Black Heaven for the first time will not even be able to see anything close to the full scope of depth the story offers. And the above also applies to Heroes of Maple with the Demon, Mercedes, Phantom, Luminous, Shade, Aaron, Evan, and Kinesis for the following reasons. So, circling back to the beginning, the problem here is that if you just want to progress in the MMO, then you have no incentive to go out and do all the quest lines that give you context for the major story events that actually hardgate your progression. And because of this, a lot of people will end up doing content like Black Heaven purely because they have to if they want to progress in the MMO, many of whom will be completely uninterested and disengaged pretty much the entire time because, again, they've done little to none of the prerequisite content that gives you context for anything that's happening or who these people are, why their decisions are significant, everything. And this will very regularly lead to people just skipping through it and possibly disincentivizing them from paying any attention to the story in future because, well, they played through Black Heaven and absolutely nothing made any sense because they have no context for anything that's happening. In fact, this is pretty much exactly what happened to me with the Mysteria Epic, since I went into it with literally none of the prerequisite content done. I just wanted the medal you got for completing it, and as such, I had no idea who any of these people were, or what their relationships were with each other, or really just any idea of what's going on. And so, I was completely uninterested and disengaged the entire time. Like, imagine watching The Avengers without seeing any of these movies first. You are going to have no idea of what's going on or who any of these people are. And sure, maybe something will happen that'll make you go,
"You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play, to lay down on a wire and let the other guy crawl over you."
I think I would just cut the wire.
Always a way out. You know, you may not be a threat, but you better stop pretending to be a hero.
whoa, that was a crazy interaction. I think? I mean, the actor's excellent performances certainly make it seem that way, but I don't know. I don't know who these characters are, and because of that, I don't understand the narrative weight of any of their words or actions, and that makes it exceedingly difficult to get immersed or invested in the story. Anyone who plays through these massive events acting as the culmination of multiple story arcs which they haven't played will have that exact experience. But guess what? With things as is, a significant amount of people, especially people coming into the game, will have that experience, because there's no incentive to get them to go out and do the previous content. And keep in mind, I'm not trying to make the argument that you should have to play certain storylines to unlock Black Heaven or Heroes of Maple or whatever. That's a terrible idea. I'm saying I think the game should, offer you something valuable in return for doing the quest lines that give you context for events like Heroes of Maple or Black Heaven. Like, even something as simple as just cranking up the EXP gains on quests, such that they're competitive with grinding in terms of leveling efficiency for early players would, I don't think that would be too bad an idea. It's also worth mentioning that the story is still going even after the Black Mage, and it is also worth mentioning that the exceeding majority of the player base will never see this content. Like, it took almost 1,000 hours of game time for me to get to 255 on my main, and EXP per level gets even worse from there. And hell, if my friend group is any indication, most people won't even make it to Tenebris. It's just too little content for too much time invested. And again, time taken isn't the problem here. Higurashi and Umineko are next up on the chopping block. I just cannot deal with these content droughts stretching on for dozens of hours of game time where I just have to fill it all in with grinding. And like the 20% EXP reduction between whatever and whatever level that they roll out every 6 months, I don't care, man. I really don't. Judging by my EXP rates before getting to 255, I've still got around 50 hours of grinding ahead of me before I get to the next area, Cernium, at 260, at which point EXP per level doubles, meaning around 100 hours of grinding to get to Burning Cernium at 265, and then another 100 to get to Hotel Arcus at 270, and it's like, no, absolutely not. For like 5 hours of story content, that's not worth it. And you know what? It sucks. It really sucks, because Saren's character design and animations look badass, and the music is godly. Moreover, a bunch of the Cygnus Knight captains are actually getting involved in the story now, who I think are really cool, and much more. Like, I still care about the story, but it just isn't worth my time anymore to go through all the effort of seeing it myself. And I'm probably just gonna watch a YouTube playthrough of everything from Black Mage onward, so I don't have to grind for another 250 hours just to sate my thirst. As a bit of a side note, although I am a Maplestory fanatic, I'm not afraid to admit that there are a ridiculous amount of problems with it, especially the later story. For starters, why is there so little character-specific dialogue in this game? I joked around way back at the start of this video about how, as the demon, you get exclusive dialogue with Orchid in Black Heaven, but it's like literally 2 lines of dialogue. That's it. And you don't even say anything back befitting of your character. It's not like every line of dialogue in this game is voiced. In fact, as far as I'm aware, your character is literally never voiced, with the exception of Zero. So would it really be so difficult to just, sprinkle on a little bit of character-specific dialogue here and there for major events? Like, you get a couple lines during Black Heaven if you're one of a few specific characters, but that's the exceeding minority. The vast majority say and do the exact same things, and regardless, a couple lines out of a 7-hour story campaign really isn't all that much. Like, am I asking for something that's seriously unreasonable here? Would it really be all that difficult for these different characters to be written as different characters when placed in the same scenarios? Like, I'm not asking for every line of dialogue to be meticulously handcrafted for each and every character. You can still have tons of common dialogue, that's completely fine. What I'm asking for is, in the cases where you'd expect a certain character to have something special to say, couldn't they have something special to say? Couldn't the Cygnus Knights, Explorers, or Resistance characters have some additional lines in the Gate to the Future where, Cygnus and her entourage have been corrupted into puppets of the Black Mage, the Resistance betrayed the Alliance to the same end, and the home island of the Explorers has been absolutely ravaged? I mean, I haven't played any of the Cygnus Knights past second job in my entire career, but from what I can remember for the Explorer and Resistance characters, they both have absolutely nothing to say about any of this. And this is especially bad from the Arcane River all the way up to the end of the Black Mage's story, where from Vanishing Journey to Esfera, the number of dialogues I can remember being specific to my character, the Demon, a former commander of the Black Mage, barely clawed its way into the double digits, despite facing off against multiple Black Mage commanders throughout the Arcane River, and in one case, clashing with Arcarium, a character who canonically straight up hates and is extremely jealous of the Demon. And it just It makes me feel like this world is so dead, as if all the little details and connections I saw between all these storylines just don't exist anymore. It got a little better in Tenebris, where, as the demon, Hilla brings up your dead brother, and you also have a bit of exclusive back and forth with the white mage and Cygnus, plus a little epilogue cutscene after, but that's it. Also, back to Best Girl, am I, the only one who sees the most obvious connection between the demon and Orchid? Why is their relationship not explored in any significant capacity? And no, I'm not saying that because Francis's love for Orchid is a pathetic speck of dust in comparison to mine. Okay, it's not just because of that, but listen. They're both former commanders of, lost a close sibling because of, and are seeking revenge against the Black Mage. And yet, all I get are 2 lines of dialogue in Black Heaven? 2? That's it? What's the deal? I feel like this is such an obvious missed opportunity for some really good character exploration. Orchid was literally right there when Hilla was tormenting the demon about his dead brother in Labyrinth, and yet she still gives him the same shtick in Limina about how he's weak because he's got so much left to lose. Come on! That's one of the major reasons the demon's the best character, by the way. His family is dead because of the Black Mage. Both of their stories are so deeply connected. Some guy did a really good write-up on all this, at one point stating, the demon ultimately summarizes the idea of keep bearing the pain of living. And yeah, that's why I found him to be such an interesting character. I chose the demon because I wanted to see his interactions with the other commanders, with the heroes, with the Black Mage, with Orchid. But from the Arcane River onwards, I got basically nothing pretty much right up until the very end. And even then, the number of unique dialogue lines I got maybe cleared 30 total. But, to put an end to the being upset about the lost potential of Maplestory's story section of the video, Global Maplestory is 6 months behind the Korean server on the update schedule. I honestly don't know why games do this, because it just does stuff like make me have to wait 6 months to get Iroha on Blue Archive, even though she was released in late April. But as a bit of a silver lining, it does mean that we effectively have a permanent 6-month roadmap. Sometimes we'll get quality of life changes pushed up on the update schedule, and we'll also occasionally get exclusive updates or changes, but in general, we can look at the Korean server patch notes and see pretty much exactly what we're going to get on the global server in 6 months' time. Now, after the Awake event went live in Korea, there's a certain item that many GMS players, myself included, had their eyes on. The Fairy Heart is an Android Heart, which goes in the dedicated Android Heart item slot. An Android Heart, in addition to its function of powering an android, can also be given a potential and Starforced. However, the default Android Heart you can get from most events, the Lydium Heart, is a level 30 item, and the strength of potentials and Starforce are directly tied to the level of an item. As a level 30 item, the Lydium Heart can get up to 4% stat per line at Legendary. Now, how much stat can the Fairy Heart, a level 100 item, get per line at Legendary? 12%. That's That's 3 times as much! As such, I, and many others, were very excited for the arrival of this item on Global, especially on Reboot, where, as far as I'm aware, there's zero method of acquiring high-level Android Hearts outside of rare events. However, when the Awake event rolled out on GMS, there was no Fairy Heart. It had mysteriously vanished from the Miso shop without a word, without a trace. What I found to be the commonly accepted and quite reasonable explanation, however, is there was going to be a rerun of the GMS exclusive wondroid event soon, through which you could acquire the wondroid heart, and the GMS staff didn't want to disincentivize one of their exclusive events by selling an alternative to one of its biggest allures just before. On its own, this wouldn't have been too much of an issue. In fact, it would perhaps even be fair, considering that the wondroid heart is actually better than the fairy heart, if not for how tedious and awful getting the android heart was compared to just pressing the buy button in the Awake Miso shop. The main shtick of this event involves going into the Aspire Tower and dragging these dumbass wondroids by the ears up and out of the multi-story basement. For one, parkour in Maple is terrible. And yes, this is pretty much 100% the fault of the terrible engine and terrible servers, but it still sucks. And Wondroid isn't just not an exception, it's a prime example, with just tons of dying to nonsense, lag, bugs, and overall just not being fun. As such, in all the previous iterations of the event, people just dodged the parkour as much as possible by grinding out all the coins you needed by hunting mobs. However, this time around, they added a coin cap to Wondroid. A coin cap of 50 coins a day. And keep in mind, it costs 2,500 coins to get a heart in Wondroid, and the event only lasted 31 days. Now, after some intense, excruciating research, I have come to the conclusion that 50 times 31 actually is not greater than or equal to 2,500. Or, in other words, people had to do this terrible parkour in this terrible engine if they wanted to get their GMS exclusive level 120 Android heart. And if they wanted their event exclusive best in slot item on multiple characters, then they had to do all of that on multiple characters. That's why this sucked, okay? In fact, that's why this section is still in the script. Yeah, fun fact for you, some additional factors for why certain sections were removed from the video. That didn't affect me, or I didn't participate in that event. I.e., I didn't really feel like I had the grounds to be stating my opinion on it. And if I could have just bought the fairy heart from the Awake shop, I would have looked at the parkour, looked at the minimal stat advantages over the fairy heart, and happily spent those 2 billion misos to have never stepped foot near Aspire to begin with. But instead, they removed the fairy heart from the Awake shop, and then tried to pass this on to us as a substitute. And so, here we are. Clearly, I wasn't the only one annoyed by this, and Nexon eventually removed the coin cap after people complained about it non-stop for like a week straight. I'd cleared Aspire like 5 times by the time they did it though, so... See, I'm laughing. I'm laughing because I think this is really funny. Also, if I could complain about the parkour just a little bit more. In one stage, you have to walk all the way to one end of this giant hallway full of death traps, only to realize the way is blocked even though there's literally a ramp going up to the surface with daylight coming down from it, like right there, and then you have to walk all the way back to the entrance to find a different way out, but the exit to this other way out that takes you to the next section is literally the entrance that you walked in from. Like, nothing has changed, okay? Nothing. Why couldn't you have just walked up on out of there to begin with? Also, in a certain section of Aspire, you could fall through the floor while escaping with one of the wondroids. This could trigger a false ban. All I gotta say to that is Nex owned. Man. You know, there are quite a lot of people who hold quite a lot of hatred towards Nexon. Quite justifiably so, I must admit, but personally I've never really been one to hop on the Nexon hate train unless they do something seriously stupid. That, and I generally hold the opinion that a lot of their poor decision-making boils down to incompetence and ignorance rather than malice or greed or anything like that. However, there was one occasion where I must capitulate, that there is at least one screw which is not just loose, but is completely unhinged and banging around the heads of the people at Nexon like a loose ray of light in a spherical mirror. In September of 2020, Nexon unveiled a shiny new event called the Magic Wagon, in which you literally spend money to do an RNG roll, such that you could have the opportunity to buy the items that have now randomly appeared in your shop. Yes, that's right. You're not even paying to spin the wheel for a random item drop anymore. That era's over. Nexon's taken the next innovative step forward. Now, you're spinning the wheel for a random chance to get an item in your shop that you can now spend more money to buy. Now, while I think it's quite obvious that I wasn't a fan of this event, and I wasn't alone in holding this opinion, there were also a lot of people who thought it was quite the bargain, and admittedly, the rates for items such as permanent pets were way better than the traditional methods of acquiring them. Still way too much for me to ever justify paying for, mind you, but yeah, okay. It was the second coming of the event in January of 2021 where pretty much everyone was unanimously astonished at how awful it was. The reason the entire community got their pitchforks out was because of a few specific changes from the previous iteration of Magic Wagon. But before I get more into this, I'd like to note that the price of NX varies per region and can literally change over time. So I'm just gonna run with the rate of $1 equals 1000 NX because it's simple, easy, and close enough. So, for starters, the cost of a restock was initially 50 cents. Which isn't all that much, but for Magic Wagon 2, it was doubled to $1 each. This on its own is already pretty annoying, but there's much more, which is much worse. Another Magic Wagon mechanic is that certain premium items, or rather, pretty much any item that was actually half decent, was gated behind paid restocks. I.e., you had to pay real money for a certain number of restocks before these premium items would even have a chance of appearing in your shop. Another mechanic that ties into the last one, your paid restock count resets every 24 hours along with the rest of your daily quests, i.e. if you paid for, say, 37 restocks the day prior, the moment it ticks over to midnight UTC and those dailies reset, the game now calculates it as if you've paid for 0 again, and this happens every day. Now, the above two factors aren't really all that bad on their own, because if you just looked at the items list and then picked out all the ones you wanted, and then rolled for and bought everything in a single session, that doesn't really make too much of a difference that your paid restock count resets every day. No. Scratch that. Sorry, but it actually does make a difference that the restock counts reset, because it very blatantly plays into the sunk cost fallacy of, you didn't get all the stuff you wanted within the budget you set? Well, you could stop spending, but if you ever change your mind later, you'll have to pay for even more restocks after your paid count resets. So maybe you should just keep spending, eh? It's already very predatory, and what I should really be saying is that it's not that much of an issue relative to the absolute debauchery that I'll be getting into in a moment. And paying like $10 worth of restocks to unlock the permanent transparency or whatever, that's fine. Well, actually, that's not fine for me, but I can see how someone with more disposable income than me wouldn't have too much of a problem with that. However, what infuriated people was the combination of the two above factors with a shining new third. Certain items, not so coincidentally the really popular ones, such as permanent pets and all the premium cosmetics, had a limit on how many of them could be purchased from the Magic Wagon per day, per region. So, let's say, for example, you're someone with good taste, a connoisseur of culture, and a curator of the fine arts. You wanted the permanent orchid pet. Well, for starters, it's locked behind a 100 paid restock requisite, so you're gonna have to fork over $100 before she even has a chance of appearing in your rolls. But here's where Nexon comes into play. There is a cap of 50-star orchid pets available per region per day, and you have no indication of when this cap has been reached. You could be rolling and rolling and rolling, trying to get the fabled best girl. Except unbeknownst to you, 50 of your fellow Orchid superfans have already gotten their star Orchid, and it is now literally no longer possible for her to appear in your rolls, no matter how many re-rolls you do. Did you know that? Did you know that? Oh wait, no! You literally did not know that, because this isn't communicated to you in any capacity. It is so moronic that it almost seems like they intentionally designed this system to profit off this exact problem. Because in this state, you have no information. You don't know if you haven't gotten it yet because the cap has been reached, or because, you know, it only has a 0.03% chance of appearing in your shop. The Magic Wagon simulator I use had to restock 1,247 times before Star Orchid appeared once. Sure, that was definitely an outlier on the higher end, but maybe you are too. It hasn't been sold out yet. Surely, you've just been really unlucky up until now. Surely you'll get it soon if you just keep rolling. Or maybe sanity prevails and you decide, no. With a limit of 50 per region, there's no way I'm getting Star Orchid unless I go for right at reset tomorrow. But guess what? Your restock count resets when the day takes over. Did you know that? Did you know that? Better fork over another $100 if you even want the chance of Star Orchid appearing in your rolls, you loser. And maybe 50 other people will get her before you again today too. And then you'll have to spend another $100 tomorrow to even begin your Star Orchid rolls. Oh my goodness, and not to mention all the money from the rolls themselves. Oh, the money. Think of all the money! It seems like this system has been surgically designed to be just so slimy and predatory. Not to mention how they just completely slashed the rates of tons of the aforementioned premium items. Permanent pets, 0.17% down to 0.03. All of the premium cosmetics, which were already gated behind 200 plus paid restocks, 0.14 down to 0.02%. Plus, they changed the website for the previous Magic Wagon to reflect the new nerfed rates. Like, did they not expect everyone to completely flip out at this? How stupid does Nexon think we are? So, yeah. People complained about it non-stop for like an entire week, and they made some changes. They removed the daily purchase limit per region, and returned the restock price to its original value of 500 NX per. So now you'd only have to fork over $50 to have a chance at Star Orchid, and there's no midlife crisis over whether or not you haven't gotten her yet because the purchase limit has been reached or you've just been unlucky. Now you can be happy knowing you're just unlucky. Although, it is worth noting that they didn't do anything about the nerfed rates. But regardless, I cannot believe that this company even had the audacity to try and pull something like this on its players. Now, before we start wrapping things up, I'd like to take a journey back, all the way back to the beginning, just as we had started preparing for CRA, as an amazing opportunity to get much stronger, much faster, had just appeared over the horizon. Double Miracle Time. And previously, this is where I would have started going into some of the differences between Reg Server and Reboot, but when I logged into my character on Scania, I had Absolab overalls in my inventory, okay? I am absolutely not qualified to talk about Reg Server, because all my time I spent playing on it, I guess I just had no idea what I was doing. So yeah, all that's been cut out, but I am still going to bring up the one minor point that was actually relevant to what I'm talking about here, and that is that, like, 60% of the GMS population are on Reboot servers, but yeah, that's about it. Anyways, Double Miracle Time used to be a regularly recurring event on Reboot, where there would be 3 one-hour windows during which your chance of an item's potential ranking up with a cube would be doubled, with there even being a chance for a double rank up. Needless to say, this would be an incredible opportunity for us to get strong enough to clear CRA much more quickly. Like, we'd literally be leveling up our equipment's potentials at double efficiency. However, the player base had just had a massive resurgence due to the start of quarantine a few months prior, combined with the Rise update, featuring Adele, admittedly one of the coolest characters to be released. So the servers had been consistently filled to the brim and beyond on every channel. And that brings us to our 0 point. The beginning of the July 2020 DMT catastrophe. And let me tell you, I was on the front lines, man. And this would truly be an event to remember. Just before DMT started, there would be a cube sale in Reboot, where you could buy 3 packs of 30 written black cubes, a total of 90 each, all for 25% off their per unit price. For some reason, this cube sale began just 30 minutes before DMT started, and so an absolutely gargantuan amount of people flooded the cash shop all at once trying to get their cubes. This is an issue that has plagued DMT for literal years now, yet Nexon has failed to do anything about it. And now, with this unprecedentedly gigantic amount of players coming in all at once, quite frankly, the servers could not handle it. You went to the cash shop to try and buy the cubes? Nothing works, request timed out, booted back to town. Tried entering the cash shop again? Screen goes black for 30 seconds into game crash.
It's miracle time.
Reopen the client? That ID is already logged in. Please try again later. Are you ready to exit? 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 Reopen the client again? How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man? How about you crash the moment you even select reboot? Now that's a Nexon moment right there if I've ever seen one. I then spent the next 10 minutes or so repeatedly trying to connect to the server and repeatedly getting the message, the server is too busy to fulfill your request right now. Please try again later. In any case, I eventually managed to clear phase 1 of DMT, connecting to the server, and I was now on phase 2, logging into my character. Unfortunately, I choked super hard, as you usually do when you make it to phase 2 of a boss for the first time. See, I made the mistake of getting confused when I entered my PIC to log into my character and absolutely nothing happened, and so I started spamming it. Although me and my friends were able to reliably make it past phase 1 at this point, we were stuck on phase 2 for almost 20 minutes. And keep in mind, the first DMT window had already started over half an hour ago. However, I eventually figured out what I was doing wrong and formulated a plan of action. Attempt everything only once. I'd attempt to log into my character once, and that's it. Make the input and then just leave it alone and see what happens. Of course, I figured the server still wouldn't be able to handle it. In fact, every attempt I made may as well have been a server array shooting sparks out everywhere on Nexon's end, but I didn't care, okay? I was getting into the game, and this would be my serious attempt to clear phase 2 of DMT. Oh, it made the noise! It made the connecting to the in-game noise. It made the I heard the crest sound! This feels so yeah, with that, I was back to phase 3, buying the cubes. And honestly, I think Nexon employed a very cool bit of boss design here that I've never seen before. See, it's not too uncommon in video games to be put into a fight where you're meant to lose. But I think Nexon took a seriously innovative step forward when they pitted you up against phase 3 of a boss in your first encounter before sending you back to the real phase 1 after you lose. It's as if I'd only been given a little taste of what the boss was capable of when I went to the cash shop at the beginning, only to get hit with the scripted death, but then the additional phases of connecting to the server and then logging into my character before finally getting back to the cash shop at phase 3. It was like the fight was building up and up and up before finally letting me finish what I'd started. Very interesting, I must say. Miyazaki, you better be taking notes for the Elden Ring DLC. Now, phase 3 actually has several sub-phases. Entering the cash shop, navigating to the cubes page, being able to see the discounted cubes, buying the cubes, and then transferring them to your inventory. This time around, I actually made it all the way to the being able to see the discounted cubes, or rather, not being able to see them before I died, because they were nowhere to be found. Fortunately, however, clearing Phase 2 unlocks a sort of pseudo-checkpoint where, even if you die in Phase 3, you'll usually just get sent back to the start of that phase. Usually. When I tried to buy a regular black cube in an attempt to skip sub-Phase 3, that just booted me back to World Select. I kept going, but after a couple minutes of Phase 3 attempts, I got hit with the disconnected into that idea's already logged in 1-2, and that was it. The first 1 hour window of DMT had ended, and I wasn't even able to see the discounted cube packs in the cash shop, let alone buy any. While that was a pretty terrible experience, with the first 1 hour window of DMT over, most people would probably go straight to bed since it ran from 4:30 to 5:30 AM EST, and as you might expect, I went to the cash shop at around 5:40 and was able to buy the cubes without much of an issue. And with that, I was ready to rumble for DMT round 2 in about 12 hours time. Now, as mentioned before, DMT has historically been plagued by these types of issues, but they generally almost completely smooth out by the second and third windows. So we believe that surely the second and third hours would be fine. Surely. It was still completely non-functional. Like, what did you expect? However, to be fair to Nexon, I have to give credit where credit is due, because while I may have praised the incredibly innovative design of DMT's Phase 3, Phase 4, using the cubes is what cemented it as one of the best bosses in gaming history, as there was just so much room for skill expression and application of game knowledge. See, in this phase, the boss only ever really uses one attack, but it's extremely difficult to deal with. Whenever you'd try to use a cube, this UI would pop up and you'd re-roll the potential, but well, I'm not exactly sure what the issue was since I'm not that much of a tech nerd and Nexon gave basically zero details, but it's something along the lines of although your client was able to process the potential reset, the server was being absolutely smothered with way more requests than it could handle, so it would literally take several minutes of just sitting there waiting before the server's backend would actually update your character's inventory after you'd use the cube. What this essentially meant is you'd get to use one cube, see the results of it, and then you'd have to wait several minutes until the game basically figured out what had happened, throughout which you literally could not cube. If you tried it, nothing would happen. You'd just have to wait it out, and the one more try feature? Yeah, that thing was not functional. However, unsatisfied with the prospect of using like 12 cubes total throughout DMT, we started experimenting to see how we could improve our rates. And for a 1 hour time slot, we innovated hard and fast. At first, we tried relogging into our characters every time we used a cube, as we theorized that it would effectively force the server to update everything with regards to our character, thus allowing the cube results to go through much more quickly. And it did, in fact, improve our rates, reducing the time between cubes to around 2 minutes. But we could do better. We developed a strategy where you would attempt to switch channels after using a cube, as it seemed that the network resources dedicated to channel switching were separate from the login servers, likely still being swamped with people figuring out Phase 1 and 2, because, you know, they didn't stay up till 4:30 in the morning to figure it out. You snooze, you lose. You still had to be careful with this, however, because there was a short wait time between making the channel change request and actually changing channel, and if you tried to relog while this process was ongoing, you'd get hit with the command grab into this ID is already logged in into are you ready to exit true combo, and you'd have to wait several minutes before you could log in again. But, for a time, it worked. Changing channel forced the cube results to go through and you could use another, and doing this got our cube rates to as low as 1 cube per 10 seconds. However, I suppose it really shouldn't have surprised me that my fellow rebooters were also fellow Nexon veterans, as they very quickly cottoned on to the same strategy, and as such, its effectiveness very noticeably waned in the latter half of round 2 and throughout the entirety of round 3. As a side note, during this round, something else happened. My friend was the first to encounter it, and this was his reaction.
Oh my god!
What happened, Robin?
I'm done. This game is trash. This game is trash.
What happened, Robin?
I can't even take a screenshot of it. Ethan, I exited. I clicked change character, right?
Yeah.
When I still have Sunny Sunday in the pension on my screen, it goes to the channel select screen with like reboot skating, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I see Sunny Sunday in front of it all. On this channel select.
Unfortunately, he was unable to get a screenshot of the spectacle he'd described, as he crashed immediately after. But, as luck would have it, I too was able to bear witness, and I'll just let the clip roll.
You see, right? It's on top of your channel select.
Okay, let me try let me try going to character select. Hold on. It's here! It's here!
Sunny Sunday. Stuck on your screen.
I can't click anything!
You can't get anything. My game just crashed. It couldn't handle.
DMT is a hallucinogenic drug, illegal for general use in the United States and Canada. Did you know that? Yeah, anyways, round 3 was pretty much the same story as before. Lots of people seem to be using the channel change strat now, but we were still going at a comfortable rate of around a cube per minute. Though several hiccups along the way meant I still had the exceeding majority of my cubes left over at the end. Acknowledging that this whole thing was a disaster, Nexon came out with a statement saying they would redo the event after performing some code optimizations to ensure stability. But yeah, you already know where this one is going.
I'm waiting. Hello? Okay, I'm not screw it. CC Tech. We're going back. They didn't do a thing! They didn't do a thing!
It worked about as well as the previous one. As in, it was barely functional, and they cancelled it after the first round, with the remaining 2 hours of the rerun being lost to nothing. Oh, and fun fact, this issue was like almost exclusive to NA Reboot, which, again, not surprising considering that NA Reboot alone is more than half the GMS population. So, in summary, the cash shop was by and large inaccessible from the start of the cube sale all the way until the end of round 1, during which I barely even managed to log into the game just in time for DMT to end. To delve into the specifics, from around the start of DMT at 4:30 AM all the way to the turn of the hour, the login servers were straight up inaccessible, after which you could get in if you waited a couple minutes, but again, you couldn't even see the cube packages in the cash shop, and attempting to buy any of the others would result in being disconnected. I honestly think the best indicator of how awful this whole thing was is this.
Oh, it made the noise! It made the connecting to the in-game noise. It made the I heard the crest sound! This feels so fun!
Like, I genuinely popped off. Like, I was going crazy. Like, whoa, yeah, baby! Because I was able to get into the game. If you were actually able to cube at all, then you'd be rate limited to 1 cube per couple minutes due to the server's backend being absolutely clogged, unless you use some pretty jank methods to force the servers to update your character data. Though, even with this, you'd still probably cap out at around 6 cubes per minute, when the rate for using cubes while the server is actually functioning is this. And keep in mind, most of that just comes from how long it takes you to read the lines you got before rolling again. So, seeing as their servers were not up to the task, Nexon decided to take a different route with the compensation, giving us scrolls to directly upgrade our potentials instead. And it was terrible. Like, actually terrible. We got 2 unique potential scrolls. I had bought around 114 red and black cubes, and factoring in the state of my gear at the start of the first DMT, I probably could have gotten everything to legendary. Instead, I got around 7 pieces of gear to legendary, or in other words, around half of what I could have and wanted to upgrade, and 5 plus 2 uniques. Like, in my case, it literally would have been more beneficial if they just let me keep cubing for the remaining 2 rounds of the rerun, as I definitely could have gotten an extra legendary or 2 out of it, not to mention how I could have gotten pretty much all my gear to legendary if the event had worked, but instead, I got 2 unique pots as compensation. Bloody brilliant. The next, and all subsequent DMT events would be dubbed Mark Your Miracle Time, where you would choose a 1-hour window from a set of a few days, during which you would get your own personal DMT time, and like, yeah, woo, good job, you did it, Nexon. It works in Reboot now, after a year. You know, I think this event, like, genuinely caused something inside my head to snap. Because I've developed this mindset over the last few years that you cannot expect anything from anyone. Okay? You gotta set your expectations at 0 such that you will never be disappointed. And I genuinely believe that this event was a major contributing factor. Like, oh, we're getting double miracle time soon. We can use that to get a whole bunch of gear upgrades. No, we won't. Oh, they're doing a rerun after some code optimizations to improve the performance. That means we'll be able to get those gear upgrades now. No, we won't. Oh, they canceled the rest of the rerun, but we're going to get a bunch of good stuff as compensation. No, we won't. If you've kept up with this game over the last few years, especially global Maplestory, you'll know there's been no shortage of drama and controversial events, a few of which I've already discussed, but on pretty much every occasion following DMT, I just did not care. No matter how bad it got, I began to just brush it off as, oh yeah, well, I'd expect nothing less from Nexon. Or, well, rather, I'd expect nothing more from Nexon. Sure, I might have played things up for entertainment purposes in this video, but at the time, I could not convince myself to care. See, it's very often that I see criticisms levied at a game going something along the lines of, oh, these developers are so out of touch with their player base. Do they even play their own game? That's not what this was to me. Sure, Nexon makes absolutely nonsensical decisions when it comes to developing Maplestory all the time. That much is obvious. They once removed a bug with Pink Bean where the item you needed to enter the boss wasn't removed from your inventory upon entry, and so now, instead of being able to fight the boss every day by just walking on in, you now were able to fight the boss every day by walking on in, after talking to some NPC over here to get the item that was now removed from your inventory whenever you went in. Now, yes, this was definitely the result of a bug, but anyone who actually plays the game knows that fixing it literally just inconveniences everyone for absolutely no reason. And it took them several months to change it back. That's not what DMT was to me. In fact, what DMT was to me doesn't even remotely go near that category. It wasn't a thing of, wow, these people have no idea what they're doing, or wow, these people are so greedy. It was a thing of, like, it made me realize that I was not playing a fully functional product, okay? And at the time, the devs had zero intention of doing anything about it. And now, here comes all the general complaints I have about this game that couldn't really fit in any other section. You have to try like 3 or 4 times to change channel before it'll actually do it. Ursus is unbelievably boring. Please delete him and add his reward money to the daily gift. Hell, if you're feeling crazy, do the same thing with Maple Tour, cause that's really boring too. Why are you rate limited on boss attempts? Like, sure, clears are fine, but why are you limited to only re-entering a boss once every 30 minutes? What is the point of that? All that's ever done for me is make it even more annoying when you crash in the middle of fighting a boss, because now you gotta wait 30 minutes before you can try again, ha 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 ha. Maple tip. Using beautiful words is another level in gameplay. While playing, you will very often get hit by the unable to connect to the game server, or you have been disconnected by police GM Maplestory for the hack reason. But then you can just immediately re-log into your character? You can't fusion anvil overalls onto top/bottom equips, meaning I can't rock the arcane umbra pirate coat unless I'm willing to lose out on tons of damage. You have to create a party for daily bosses and other daily tasks, but you have to disband it for others, even if you're literally going in by yourself every single time. Equipping a cosmetic cape item hides my wings. Cash shop inventory isn't shared across an entire world, only across certain groups of characters. Like, considering that there's cash shop inventory transfer events, I really don't get what the point of this is. Whenever the game plays a video cutscene, it blows your eardrums into the stratosphere. Tip! Ursus's name at birth was Veronica. Maplestory stores your character data based on your character's name, rather than a character ID system or anything like that, and so, each name is only available for use by one character across the entire game. And since the game has been out for almost 2 decades now, well, if you want to sit there and come up with like a cool name for your character, you're gonna be seeing a lot of this. You have to constantly go and rebuy things such as the second pendant slot, safety charms, and buff freezers when I really think all 3 of those things should have their effects permanent and active by default. A lot of items have arbitrary and often weirdly low stack limits, and because of that, they take up way much of your inventory than they have any reason to. If you open your item storage and then close it, there's a very good chance that you will not be able to access it again for another minute or so, with you just getting this message instead every time you click on it. You have to go into the Legion raid, walk out, and then talk to this NPC to collect your Legion coins. Please make it so you just have to click a Collect Coins button. Your profession level degrades over time past level 10. There's a whole bunch of animations for bosses and such that aren't scaled to 1080p. Maintenances are regularly extended by several hours, occasionally past reset, and we regularly have to deal with unscheduled maintenances, occasionally steamrolling over evening prime time for playing games, for all of which we are given absolute garbage compensation in return. Hey Nexon, how about for every hour that the servers are down, you dole out 100 million misos? How about that? No 4K support. I either have to play the game in full screen, where it takes 2.5 seconds to tab into or out of the game, play the game with this window size relative to my monitor in windowed mode, or change my monitor's resolution to 1080p whenever I want to play. Additionally, since I play in full screen, whenever I'm in the cash shop or login screen, the 4:3 aspect ratio is stretched to a 16:9, and it makes everything look completely wrong. And, of course, you will very regularly get disconnected from the game out of nowhere, or just crash, and pretty much every single time it is going to be 100% the game's fault. And that's barely even scratching the surface of all the little things that are wrong with this game. And it makes the experience of playing it like, the only thing I can equate it to is trudging through a disgusting swamp. And keep in mind, I am not making a mountain out of a molehill here, okay? I'm making a mountain out of a mountain's worth of molehills, because all of these relatively minor issues may not be that much of a problem on their own. Like, yeah, sure, you have to try and change channel 3 or 4 times before it'll actually do it. whatever, that's manageable. But the sheer quantity and consistency of the presence of all these issues have coalesced into this amalgam of a continuously unenjoyable experience. Admittedly, the game has been getting better, as every major update these days has a mountain of bug fixes and general improvements attached. Plus, with the Destiny and Ignition updates, they've finally started going back and seriously polishing up their older content. But, like, it took their reputation getting absolutely dragged through the dirt with the Flames controversy, and Lost Ark coming in and doubling their market share in Korea, for them to finally diverge from just pumping out a new overloaded class along with the same reskinned event every 6 months, while the game's basic features and core gameplay loop range from extremely annoying to barely functional. Regardless, as for those bug fixes and improvements, well, there's a lot of them, so I won't go over everything, but here are a few good ones. The game was updated to a 64-bit client, meaning I could open the game in 15 seconds now instead of 3 or 4 minutes. Very nice. You can skip through the story of Arcane River areas if you've done it on at least one other character on that world, with the same going for boss prequests for Papulatus, Fon Leon, Arcarium, Pink Bean, Cygnus, Magnus, and several other bosses. You can have pop-ups on your screen when a certain skill goes off cooldown, a full Explorer rework with a Cygnus Knights rework coming up next, and every class gets 100% knockback resistance by default. Plus, a lot of other cool stuff that I probably missed because painstakingly reading through a year's worth of patch notes is something that I got bored of within less than an hour, and I'm moving on. While a lot of the major problems I had with this game have been fixed, or at least are going to be addressed in future, I don't care anymore. I'm gone and I don't want to come back, because I just have too many problems with the fundamental mechanics of this game. And regardless, Nexon's already walked all over my heart. Yeah, there are still a lot of things that I'd like to do. Mostly fashion story stuff, to be honest. Mainly, I'd like to make an android that looks exactly like Kyoko Kirigiri, but, well, for one, I'd have to spend money to do that, and throughout my entire Maplestory career, I've literally spent $0 on this game, and I'd like to keep it that way, but more importantly, I'm done, okay? I've had more than enough of this game. Would I say this game sucks and you shouldn't play it, though? Well, I do certainly want to just say yes and then end the video there, because the previous statement built up the expectation that I would say no, and I think subverting that would be pretty funny. For starters, I didn't go into, or actually rather, I just completely cut out any discussion on a large number of topics, including, but not limited to, Scrapyard and Dark World Tree weeklies, Nodestones, Professions, Guild activities, Maple Tour, Ursus, Familiars, Monster Park, Potable badges, flattening the curve of EXP required to level, Maple Globe, Arcane and Sacred Symbols, Gollux Double Pendant removal, U Garden, Mark Your Miracle Times implications, Beast Tamer and Thunderbreaker nerfs, Maple Cafe on a spring day, aged mechanics from a game that no longer exists, everything as an expiration date, why I've never given Nexon a cent, and much, much more. Quite frankly, it took me 1.5 years to get to the point where this video could go into full production, and I really don't want to spend another 2 on scripting and editing. As such, I haven't given anything even remotely close to the full picture of what playing this game is actually like. Moreover, even considering just the content that remains, with my dwindling willpower and ability to fact-check every little detail of the script at this stage of production, I almost certainly got something wrong. In fact, it's quite likely that I got many things very wrong, so there may very well be things I framed as major issues which just aren't, or things that I brushed over or didn't even mention that are major problems. Also, it must be noted that this video was made from the perspective of me, and I'm not that big on MMOs, and this journey of mine is actually what made me realize that. I see now that pretty much every MMO I've played in the past, or am planning to play in future, I played pretty much entirely for the RPG bit, with my having quit all of the above because I found said RPG elements to be quite lacking. With my stance on the MMO bits generally being I was just grinding out stats and dopamine points, very often in a painfully monotonous manner. Additionally, I count among my favorite games the likes of Dark Souls 3, Hollow Knight, Terraria, and Dead Cells. As per the above, several aspects of the game, progression, movement, combat, general gameplay, handling of the story, character writing, all of which I have rampantly complained about, may very well be things other people actually enjoy, or at the very least don't mind. And if so, like I said before, to each their own. And as much as I've trashed on this game's progression and combat mechanics, the joys of character progression, as Nexon puts it, are admittedly very real. It was genuinely really cool and satisfying to see my character grow over time, both in terms of strength and fashion, even if I found the process by which I got there to be profoundly unenjoyable. And again, I did really enjoy bossing with my friends, even if I didn't think the bosses themselves were all that good. Ultimately, what I see in this game is a ridiculous amount of potential. For one, because I still believe that Maplestory has the most interesting fictional world I have ever seen in any form of media. If everyone quits the game and it dies, all that potential will be lost, but if things keep going, then hope still remains. Personally, I'm not getting my hopes up, but as mentioned before, a lot of the major issues with this game have been and continue to be addressed, so maybe there's a chance. In any case, all that was really just a very long-winded and extremely roundabout way of saying that I don't think it would make sense to end with a definitive statement on the quality of the game as a whole, so instead I'll pose to myself what I believe to be a much more interesting question. Is this really the end? Is this really going to be the point where I leave behind Maplestory as an era bygone? Am I really never gonna come back to this game which I hold so close to my heart? Yes.